Happy Saturday, everybody. Nice to see you guys. No, I can't see nobody. Even with these big glasses on, I can't see nobody. But I know you're out there. I can see a number count. And we've got a good guest today, Objective Ethics. We're going to have Sophia, my moderator, on, or my co host, rather, on today. And we're talking about, can consciousness exist without a brain? And we'll talk about that today. Now, the common claim is that the brain creates consciousness, right? And that's grounded in something we call, whether people know it or not, is grounded on something called ontological realism. And this is the assumption that there exists a mind independent physical world in which brains are the fundamental, causally sufficient generators of an experience. And this view treats the brain as an object whose properties exist fully and independently of observation and assumes that consciousness must therefore emerge from its physical processes. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about it. But just to kind of overlay or kind of outline the position that I have and that my co host has, and we'll discuss it, different views on these beliefs, right? Ontological realism, though, to get back to that foundation, is the view that a mind independent reality exists exactly as it is, regardless of observation or conceptualization. And it assumes that the world can be known truly as it is, more or less. However, this assumption is difficult to sustain because, all human knowledge is really mediated through our perceptions, our language, our frameworks, conceptual frameworks, that is. We never really access reality directly, right? Instead, we interpret sensory input through cognitive structures shaped by, our evolution, by nature, by our culture, our personal experiences through life. So what we call facts or objects are therefore always sort of filtered through these frameworks. And this raises the question of whether reality as we conceive it truly mirrors any mind-independent world or just merely reflects the structures of a human cognition. It may be different for a bat, as Nagel pointed out in his book. A further challenge comes from the limits of language and categorizations. Concepts like objects, parts, wholes, they're not really intrinsic features of reality, but these things are sort of like words. They're tools for organizing our experiences and conveying these experiences to others. So, like, I don't know if you guys ever heard of mereology. Mereology is the study of parts and wholes, and it demonstrates how we can carve the world into entities that depend on presuppositions that are just built into our conceptual systems. Like a forest can be treated as one object or many. A molecule can be described in multiple ways depending on your context. So these choices reveal that what we treat as ontological reality is oftentimes just a projection of conceptual convenience rather than an unmediated reflection of existence itself, like how it really is. And finally, developments in modern physics and philosophy underscore the provisional nature of supposed realist claims, like in quantum mechanics, for example, shows that at a fundamental level, particles do not have definite properties independent of observation. And this suggests that observation and measurement are entangled with what we call reality. So this reasoning may be flawed because it conflates framework-dependent constructs with ultimate reality. So brains are described and understood within the conceptual system of biology, not as entities revealed in themselves apart from cognition, though. If consciousness is the very medium through which all experience and these concepts arise, then just reducing it to the activity of a brain risks creating like a causal order as kind of an assumption for how things work fundamentally. The brain is only known through consciousness, making the claim that it generates consciousness potentially incoherent, right? So, similarly, like philosophical idealism posits that consciousness is the primary ground in which the appearances of objects and facts emerge from. Taken together, these considerations kind of suggest that ontological realism may be flawed. Reality, as humans experience and describe it, may not exist as a fixed, independent reality, but rather as a structured manifestation within consciousness in conceptual frameworks. Right? So, like in modern physics, causality may not be fundamental as a feature of reality, but rather an emergent or approximate principle arising within certain frameworks. Like in quantum mechanics, for example, events at the subatomic level are governed by probabilities rather than deterministic cause and effect chains. Phenomena like entanglement challenge the notion that influences really propagate locally in a classical causal event sort of order. Similarly, our intuitive understandings of this kind of causation can emerge from more basic atemporal structures. This suggests what I'm suggesting really is that what we perceive as causal sequences is a macroscopic approximation. And these insights here imply that causality, rather than being an absolute property of the universe, may reflect patterns imposed by observation and conceptualization. And this highlights the probability that our everyday notion of cause and effect is contingent and not ontologically primary. So this throws in the whole question about the brain and whether it actually produces or causes consciousness. Maybe it's a property of the brain. Maybe the brain's a property of consciousness. On idealism, it's the latter. But we're going to actually discuss these things, and I'm going to bring my guest on, Objective Ethics. How you doing, my friend? Nice of you to join me today, buddy.
Good morning, sir. It's a pleasure. Now, for some reason, I had this set up for an hour from now because I thought we're doing 11:30 my time. So I just literally got out of bed. Let me grab my coffee and just
Oh
just just
yeah.
fill the air for a minute here. I'll be right back.
Oh no, no problem at all, man. Take your time. And yeah, so I usually try to stay on time with the show. I thought I'd bring it, and let you come in a little later if need be. Not a big deal, but glad you came all the same. But the other thing that I can talk about are things that we're talking about. Is it true that the brain causes consciousness, for example? Well, let's talk about truth and facts. Like, truth is often defined simply as what the facts are. And on this view, truth corresponds to reality as it exists independently of perception. Yet the concepts of facts is not really straightforward if you think about it. They don't really represent themselves raw to human beings, but they're always mediated by interpretation, categorization, language, everything I was talking about before. So while truth might seem like a direct mirror of objective reality, in practice, it sort of functions through conceptual frameworks, right? And so truth is conceptual, and this reliance on framework suggests that truth is not a brute feature of reality, but conceptual achievement. So truth is sort of out there. We discover these truths. And if truths are dependent on minds, then again, this points to mind as sort of fundamental to knowing what might be true and what's not. What do you think, Sophia? Am I thinking too much about this stuff?
No, because I barely heard anything you said.
Oh,
But
great.
anyway, I have to listen a little longer because it was glitching.
Oh no. Okay.
Sorry.
So yeah, so what are your thoughts about the question of the brain generating or causing consciousness? What are your thoughts on that? How would you phrase it?
Talking to Sophia or to me, to myself.
Oh, I guess that'll be to you, objective, since you're here.
All right. Well, just first of all, just let me just say really quick. I
Uh
just
huh.
to warn everybody, I literally just got out of bed. I thought I had another hour to go, so I'm still trying to kind of put the
You
pieces
did.
together here.
I wanted to apologize to you about that because you're more than welcome to come in an hour later. I just started the show because I usually go on for like 2 3 hours. So if you popped in, that'd be cool too. I was just gonna kind of fill the air for an hour.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. I didn't know. I didn't realize that, and so
yeah,
I didn't
I
want to be
didn't even
rude.
tell you that either. So
Okay,
you didn't
no
know.
problem. Well, I'm up now and I'm having coffee. So if I start acting stupid, I might go and come back. But I think I can wing it here. Um, it's such an honor to be able to speak with both of you, Miss Sophia and Scott. Now, Scott,
Yeah.
I've met you a couple times. We've talked. I've been very impressed with you. I actually watched a couple of your videos here, and man, you really know your stuff. You are a deep thinker, brother. I've been very impressed.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you.
And Sophia, sister, I was really impressed with you as well. I met you for the first time, not the only time I was on this show, and you brought up so many really great points. And I just thought, wow, this is going to be an honor to be able to speak with both of you. So I'm glad that you're both here today. Thank you for sharing time with me.
Heck yeah, man. You're more than welcome. And I
So
don't know if
let's
Sophia's having audio issues or not. Let me just check. Can you hear us okay, Sophia?
Well, thank you for being here with us. And I actually
Uh, there's a lag going on. Okay, she's gonna come on back, but yeah, I'm sure she appreciates your comments, and I definitely do as well, brother. And I've been really impressed with you too. That's why I wanted you to actually come on the show and conversate with us on a lot of these topics. I know you'd have a lot to bring to the table, new, fresh ideas.
Well, it's always so interesting to be able to meet people, even if you don't agree with everything they say, but at least people who are obviously putting the work in, doing some research, testing their ideas, and who are deep thinkers. Because it seems like, man, I hate to say this, but it just seems like there's so many shallow people who are basing everything on emotions, and they're just not really engaging in intellectual conversations or thoughts. And so I find that to be a little frightening, to be honest with you, because it seems like the majority of people. Now, I might just be misreading into things incorrectly, and I could be way off base about that. Maybe I'm just interacting with the wrong people. I don't know.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because I sort of feel the same way. Um, because one of the things that I kind of believe, right, and I think this points to a danger in our society where we have this dichotomous thinking, and then everyone has their heels dug in to their specific side. Like, for example, like I kind of feel like truth is sort of always dependent on the frameworks of modeling that we employ, right? So, what might count as true in physics, biology, or ethics, is never really a mirror of reality in itself, but it's just the outcome of conceptual and mathematical structures that really organize these experiences under these topics, right? So, a lot of people don't really understand that. And so they just take their conceptual frameworks and ideas as dogmatically true. Like I could grant them that, yeah, the brain actually does create consciousness on a particular perspective, but maybe that doesn't really apply in all other perspectives that we can talk about, right? So, what do you think about that idea?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And before I deep dive into the consciousness, I want to just touch on something you said, because I think it's very relative to a lot of things that are happening in society. And that's this idea, being married, there, for a lot of guys who know out there, my wife has been teaching me essentially that there's such a thing as, her truth, or what she calls my truth. And I tend to be very pragmatic about truth. When I hear truth, I think, well, there's only the truth, right? It's not subjective. But this really isn't realistic. And my wife is absolutely right. And one of the ways that our relationship functions really well is because I listen to her and I try to learn from what she's saying. And everybody, just like what you're saying, they have their own truth. There's an objective reality that's empirical, right? And
Mm-hmm.
science and mathematics can help us understand that. But as we are all individuals navigating life in our own way, ultimately we're each going to kind of have our own sense of truth, you know. And so it's really important, if we're going to function with other human beings, to be empathetic and try to understand what their truth is, you know what I mean? And so I just to kind of hit that before we dive right into consciousness. Sophia, glad to see you back. Can you hear us better now?
Yes, I can hear you now, and I'm sorry that I'm having all these issues. I did want to say that I appreciate you coming on as well, and I was really impressed with pretty much everything you were saying. It's probably I'm probably biased because it's in alignment with how I think, and so I'm really glad to have you as well.
No, I appreciate that. It's that's very humbling when people I look up to and I admire when you
Can y'all
say
hear me?
positive things.
Yep, we can
Yeah,
hear
I
you.
can hear you a lot better, a lot better. Okay, so as far as consciousness goes, if I may, that is a very interesting topic. I want to clarify that I don't have a set belief or determined theory on something like this. You know, I'm still working on the idea itself, so I don't want to misrepresent that I am actually trying to push a particular idea or agenda here, because I'm certainly not. I'm just here to kind of work it all out, okay? But there is a very interesting philosopher, Spinoza. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with
Mm,
him. And
yes.
he talked about something that he called the substantive monism, which is the idea that everything is an attribute of one thing, right? And he wrote something, I believe it was called Nature and God, or Nature or God. And so basically, it's the idea that you can substitute either the idea of God or nature. It's irregardless of the truth. The truth is that this one substance exists. It could be considered the necessary substance, if you will, and everything is simply an attribute of that one substance. This might relate to something more like panpsychism, if it were going to be more of a kind of a
Mm-hmm.
religious concept. And so I do find that to be very compelling, because this then gets us to this hard problem of consciousness, right? So consciousness is essentially the mental aspect, if you will, or that cognitive aspect of the one substance, which would mean that you and I and Sophia are, and everybody are all technically tied into the same consciousness, and we are all individual attributes or properties of this one substance.
Mm. That sounds very similar to the LFM model. What do you think about that compared to your model, Sophia? That seem a little similar?
If y'all can hear me, I don't I
Yep.
cause y'all are glitching out. I'm about to switch to my phone and come back. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Yeah. Yeah, it sounds very similar, and I'm used to panpsychism. And for folks who may not know what panpsychism is, you want to clarify that term, let everybody knows what that means.
Well, it's fairly new to me, and I haven't done a deep dive into it. So you might be a better one to define that. My understanding of it is essentially that God, quote unquote, is the substance of all things. So everything is a derivative of God. God's connected to everything, all life. Now, am I getting that
Hmm.
correct?
Um, the in a way, so panpsychism, at least in the modern versions, like the ones that Philip Goff talk about, David Chalmers, people like that, what they say is that fundamental to reality is consciousness, right? So, and it's fundamental because it comes along with matter and energy. So, matter and energy have some unimaginable, somewhere on the spectrum, some sort of quantity of what you could call a first-hand subjective experience. So there's something it's like to be a photon, for example. So there's something unimaginably reactive, like maybe it's just a basic awareness. Like, if I'm interacting with this molecule, we do this. It's because I have this sort of awareness. So it's an assumption that there's an awareness inside of every little piece of matter and energy that you could talk about. And if you combine all of these properties together, then consciousness changes into ever more evolving different forms of consciousness. So, for example, like if we're made up of trillions of bacterias and cells and things like that, each one of those entities have a little piece of consciousness, some sort of awareness built into them naturally, as a brute fact. And as we combine into a human, it creates human like consciousness by combining all those elements together. So that's what panpsychism is, from what I understand
Well, that's a much better definition than the one I gave. So you're, you're
it.
doing a great
Well,
job.
yeah, and I mean, do now a lot of critics point out some of the logical problems with this. Do you think you could point out any of the logical problems that might exist within this sort of description?
I haven't thought that much about it because when I first heard about this, it was not too long ago, and I hadn't actually done much of a deep dive into it. My understanding is very generic. And when I talked about the substantive monism, it seemed to align with this idea that everything is basically connected through this consciousness. But I haven't actually
Hmm.
really picked it apart yet.
Gotcha. So, like, it sounds like what you're speaking about, when you were just trying to describe panpsychism, you're saying that everything is a piece or a fractal of God's mind. That's more like idealism, which would put matter as sort of a secondary appearance within the mind of God. So, in other words, everything starts with God, and then individual minds sort of emerge or relate to the overall phenomenal consciousness of God. So that's more like an theistic, idealistic view. But the problems that you would find with panpsychism is the world famous, combination problem, is what they call it. So you'd have to describe how does each of these little bits of consciousness add up in order to make a unified experience of being a human? Why does it all break down into just one unified experience rather than all of these little parts still maintaining their consciousness? And if so, how does it do it? How does it work if
Okay.
it's the opposite way? It's like there's a lot of questions about that. So that's one of the problems. Anyway, Sophia, you're back. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, yes, everything sounds better now. I don't know, something's wrong with my laptop, I guess.
Uh, Always something. Did you want to add anything to the conversation, or have you been just we've been glitching out too much for you?
I have been glitching out too much, but I think the question was, can consciousness exist without the brain? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the overall topic. Yeah.
I mean, I could add from my standpoint, which is going to be from the LFM model,
Yep.
Lucifer frequency model. And basically, I'm an idealist, and it's just a little bit different. Like, you know what I mean? But I just think that consciousness is primordial. It exists, and that's just all there's to it. It's not created or whatever. It just is, right? And so I see consciousness as like infinite potential, and everything else arises out of it, right? Comes from it or whatever. But you
Hmm.
could also say it's like if you focus on something within yourself, right? Or you put your mind to something specific, then whatever you focus and concentrate your thoughts on is what becomes part of your reality. So in a way, it's like consciousness, is its own inner light, and it has the ability to self-reflect, and then it focuses in on itself on different aspects of itself. And I believe that that is what we experience as, our own subjective reality and objective reality, things that we all experience in common, right?
Hmm.
Does that make
Any
sense?
thoughts? Yeah, it made sense to me. What do you think, Objective?
I think that's absolutely fascinating.
God dang
That
it.
is absolutely fascinating. These are some things I hadn't really taken deep dives into, but I'm so glad I jumped into this conversation because I'm learning a lot for one thing right off the bat. And I don't mind telling you guys that, just to be humble, I don't have all these answers, but when I'm just shooting from the hip here now, to be clear, I'm an agnostic,
Hmm.
a full agnostic. So when I use words like God and things of this nature, I'm really trying to just use a generic term for something that's kind of, maybe the necessary being concept, something that may or may not even exist outside time and space. So if there are any theists who are listening, or even atheists for that matter, and they might have a better understanding or a more subjective understanding of what this quote unquote God is. So I want to be clear about that. But I'm wondering, when we talk about consciousness and the inner reflection and consciousness being this infinite potentiality, that is fascinating because I hear a lot of theists who are philosophers talk about potentiality versus actuality. And I try to base everything that I can when it comes to philosophical or transcendental ideas to the something that we have empirically that we can look at least an example, right? Like maybe an imperfect form from Plato's concepts, if you will, of
Hmm.
reality. And that's not always going to be a perfect one to one, because anytime you get into an analogous relationship, you're already starting off with imperfection, right? The analogy can't be the thing that you're describing. Otherwise, it would be the thing that you're describing. It wouldn't be an analogy. But
Hmm.
I'm thinking of this actuality versus potentiality, and it reminds me of some philosophers who are Catholics that I've spoken to, and they told me that their concept of God, quote unquote, is all what did they say? Infinite um, actuality. So their concept of God, there's no potentiality; it's just always actuality. And I'm
Hmm.
thinking of this in physics, and how would that actually work? Are you talking about potentiality as is potential energy, for example, right? And then you have actual energy, which would be like kinetic energy, for example, right? So
Hmm.
that's when something actually, like, matter changes velocity or position or something of this nature. Radiant energy, things of this nature. Uh,
Yeah.
so so this is I'm trying to now map this onto what the sister was saying about consciousness just being potentiality. So, are we then, if we're going to map this onto the world that we are experiencing right now, and we see matter, the rooms that we're all sitting in, the physical world that we're all existing in, where does that come from? Is that always infinite, or is this even touching on that at all? It just because I'm just curious as to how you're mapping that onto the world we're experiencing.
Yeah. For example, like when you look at a blank canvas, you don't see just the white surface. A surface. You might sense like the possible images it could become. So similarly, in perception, the mind is never really fixed on bare actuality. It anticipates, it projects, it holds open countless possibilities. Like the apple could be eaten, it could be painted or thrown away. And this kind of suggests that consciousness is not a passive mirror of reality, but an active field of potential where meaning arises from relations, like an interplay between what is actualized and what could be the case, the potential. So in philosophy, like Aristotle described potentiality as a fundamental mode of being. And modern thinkers sometimes connect this to how consciousness sort of operates as a space of openness, not reducible to fixed physical states. And so potentiality can sort of be seen as the basis of consciousness itself, like the fertile ground that allows awareness to manifest in all the possibilities, the choices, creativity come to actuate from. Um, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? And
It does. It
Sophia,
makes.
jump in if you have anything to add to that.
Go ahead, Sophia.
Yeah, she might be. I think she's frozen. Yeah, go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, it does, brother. It makes a lot of sense. I'm not saying I'm necessarily in full agreement or not because I haven't. Okay, here she is.
Yep.
I was trying to see if you could state your question again so I can fully understand it.
Yes, ma'am. So what I was trying to ask, and just kind of just get a better understanding of this idea, is that if consciousness is just pure potentiality, where does the matter come from? Where does the actuality actually? How does that take effect? Does consciousness create
Oh,
matter,
okay.
or is consciousness simply an emergent property of? Or I'm sorry, is matter just an emergent property of consciousness, or how does that? How do the two tie together?
Yeah, it's an emergent property of consciousness. In other words, consciousness cannot manifest itself as anything that it isn't already. You see what I'm saying? So the potentiality includes, in my model, frequency, which then it's like a transformation actually. It's frequency transforming into energy, and then energy transforming into matter. You see what I'm saying? And that's basically what I think it is. It just, because when I heard about the observer effect, and I'm not a scientist, I'm just a mystic who has a bunch of experiences. I started seeing that quantum mechanics and all these things that these quantum scientists talk about explain the things that I experience. So if an observer has to be there to observe reality for reality to exist, to me it's only logical that consciousness therefore is observing itself, because who else would be observing consciousness? And then we would be talking about a God, right, outside of consciousness, and I don't believe in that.
That is
Because
very interesting.
then we go into infinite regress, and then we say, well, then who's observing God? And it just
Right,
goes on and on and on. So
right.
to me, the logical conclusion is consciousness just is, and it possesses all the potential for all the manifestations that we experience.
Yeah, that was something that came to mind, was the infinite regress, I'm glad you brought that up. The other thing I would mention now, so the observation effect. This is something that actually ties to something that Brother Scott had said a little bit earlier before we both jumped on, that I was thinking of, and my understanding of, and again, I'm not a physicist. Okay, so this is just a lot of this is honestly just outside my field of understanding, but I do the best I can. But my understanding about the
Same.
observation, well, we can only do what we can. My understanding about the observation effect is that essentially it's not to say that things don't exist, quote unquote, without observation, but the only way that we are able to observe things is to hit them with some type of a photon or energy, right? So that we can
Hmm.
actually observe it. At which point, that energy, that radiant energy that we are hitting matter with, that we're applying to matter, that interacts with matter and causes it to then be observable. So it's not to say that that matter doesn't actually exist, or those molecules or those uh, atoms aren't actually doing something. It's just that when we actually catch them in a particular state, it's because we've hit them, like with light, for example, right? Because it has to reflect back to the eye, to the retina. So, am I understanding that correctly then?
Yeah, you are like the observer
Yeah,
effect.
I would
Like,
agree. I would agree with that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would agree with
That
that, because some idealists say it's just a dream and it's not even real, right? But in my model, I don't have to deny the physical reality. The physical reality is just as real. So I definitely agree.
yeah, and like the observer effect doesn't depend on an aware subject. It could just be the interaction between energies. I mean, I think that's how quantum computing works. So we know that the interaction doesn't necessarily rely on like a mind, so to speak. But on idealism, the way to explain that would be that at that level, all you're really doing is abstractions. Like no one's really seeing a subatomic particle or some sort of wave or some sort of. No one's really seeing what the thing ontologically is. It's mainly a coordinate. It's a description, an abstraction. And all of these abstractions occur within the consciousness of the observer. They're putting all this stuff together. And so the only thing we really know for sure is we're having the experience of measuring these things and that they're acting this way. And we're able to predict based on how the world appears to us. How does the universe appear to us and through us? And so we're more like part of the equation, not outside of it. We're not really outside looking in objectively at all, ever. We're subjects. And we see the world as we do because of the kind of observers that we are in this reality. So it's more of a an interactive sort of relationship, and that's probably, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that's why things act the way they do. It's just that's the nature of reality. And being that we're part of that reality, it's going to appear to us a certain kind of way that may not appear the same way to, say, an alien in some far off galaxy somewhere. They may see things different. Hopefully, though, math is a universal language, and that would be the way that we could actually communicate with something like an alien or something like that. So there's something that we can ground it in, but even mathematics is an abstraction. So it all comes back down to consciousness for me.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I do think that's very interesting. I do think that it's difficult when we try to have linear conversations to talk about mathematics and then brute facts, because mathematics is technically a language and it's completely arbitrary. However, it denotes something that is demonstrable, and I think that demonstrable thing that some people refer to as physics or brute facts or immutable facts, things of this nature that just describe reality. I believe that is universal, at least in this universe. Now, when we talk
Hmm.
about multiverses or prior to this universe, who knows? All bets are off the table at that point, in my opinion. But at least when we're talking about this universe, I do agree with you that mathematics, quote unquote, would be that universal language, which is why I think that music may be one of our best communication tools if we ever did interact with somebody that had a different, quote unquote reality, so to speak.
Yeah, frequency. That's
Yes,
you're using
absolutely.
frequency as a way of communicating. What do you think, Sophia?
Yeah, I agree. I'm very sorry I had to go outside. Um I'm very I'm all into frequencies. I think frequency can express a lot more than words, and words a lot of times just convolute things. And we should focus more on just the experience and the frequency. We have all these preconceived notions because of words. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to semantics. And then you can play that game and convolute everything. And I think that's kind of our problem. Instead of just connecting from an inner um, perspective, like the fact that we can relate to one another without focusing on appearances. That's why we have things like racism and shit like that, and it's
Mm,
we need to focus on the frequency. We need to start relating to one another because we're all pretty much, like you said, we're all in the middle of experience and we're having these experiences at the same time. And we're all kind of a part of it at the same time. So, we need to just start having empathy for one another. And I feel like it's just lacking big time because everyone tries to see themselves as something separate. There's no unity. It's
yeah,
very troubling.
it's almost like an expansion of or. It's like, how there's this model. I don't know if you're familiar with it, objective, but there's this quantum idealist sort of model called or, which basically says that certain structures in the brain, they call them microtubules, they receive frequencies. And then once these frequencies orchestrate and they're strong enough in the brain, it creates a conscious moment, right? So the more you get this orchestration and it sort of binds all the different parts of the brain together through this quantum interaction, it causes this ineffable feeling, subjective feeling of being alive, being a person that exists and observing the universe, depending on what kind of nervous system you have, what kind of sense organs you have, on and on. But the theory has a few predictions that came true. So it's a pretty good, by all counts, it's a pretty good theory on consciousness. It's one of the leading ones. Anyways, I was just thinking about what Sophia just
It's
said.
like an orchestra.
Yeah, it's like an orchestra, right? And suppose everybody else's brain could sort of resonate with everyone else's brain on this planet. It would be so much more cohesion and our consciousness would expand, just kind of like it does on the orc ord model with all the resonating microtubules in a brain. It creates this conscious, unified experience. Maybe that could
Yeah,
be
it's
like
like
an
a
analogy.
harmonizing. It's like a
Yeah,
harmonizing.
harmonizing.
Once the harmony is there, you get this awesome experience of an orchestra. Because all the all the frequencies are in harmony, and I think that's the problem. We have forgotten that inner essence of everyone, that it's really all frequency, and we don't align ourselves in harmony anymore. And
Yeah.
music can kind of teach us that, if we just pay attention to music and how you have to harmonize to make a good sound rather than like some chaotic sounding shit.
Mm.
Harmony is very important, and that theory, I think, is gonna open the door, or already has opened the door to us getting closer to figuring this out. I mean, it doesn't have all the answers yet, but I think it's very promising.
But there's
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a
Go
couple.
ahead.
Oh, bit. Yeah, just real quick because I'm so tired. I'm still waking up. I don't want to lose
Mm-hmm.
my thought here because
Mm-hmm.
some really important things were just mentioned here, and it really ties into what's happening in today's political and social arena. And I'd just like to highlight that. So one of the things you guys have probably already noticed this because it's something that I do habitually without even thinking about it. And I tend to I believe, even though I'm not religious or anything, I tend to believe that all men are my brothers and all women are my sisters. And so I refer to people I just habitually as brother, sister, or family. I do this all the time, and I don't mean to, because I know some people don't get it or they don't appreciate it. They don't see me as, you know what I mean? And so I know that there are some people that do not like that. And I don't mean to be offensive because I actually just believe that we're all tied to one race, the human race, and I'm not the only person that thinks this, obviously, but I
Mm-hmm.
learned this, interacting. I've always gotten along with everybody. I grew up on the streets. I was surrounded by people of all different colors and all different ages and genders. And when you're in desperate situations, and I also did time, when you're in the joint, when you're in these kind of desperate situations, you're more worried about food, shelter, physical safety, the real basic necessities. Oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, what was that? I missed what she said.
I think she just
No, I was
glitched
saying
out.
I would have never suspected that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a wild ride. So I believe in objective ethics, which for a skeptic is kind of a fringe view. Obviously, a lot of skeptics don't believe in objective morality. And of course, theists claim they believe in objective morality, but they
But they
misunderstand the
don't.
terms objective and subjective. Yeah, so I actually do believe in objective ethics, and I believe that it's tied to nature. So I've been working on a syllogism for this, a deductive syllogism that comes to a sound conclusion. And I believe I finally got it. But anyway, I've been talking to a lot of people, philosophers and authors of books who've been very gracious with their time to help me out with this. And one gentleman who I spoke with here recently, who is an author himself, he really liked what I had to say about it all, and he suggested that I write a book about it. And I laughed at the idea because I've been told by many people I should write a book, not about this, but about my life experiences, because I have been through so much in life. My father was murdered when I was young. I went through several broken homes and foster homes before I ended up as a kid on the streets. And
Mm-hmm.
then I went through that. I ended up working in the adult industry. I went into the joint. I had a drug addiction I had to overcome. And I was really on the road to hell, so to speak. But I was able to turn my life completely around to where I ended up, once I got out of the joint, I started a small janitorial business, just cleaning toilets, and working
Mm-hmm.
hard. Made quite a bit of money doing that, was able to sell that business. I ended up then getting into building kayaks and stand up paddle boards, which is more passionate. I'm a surfer and a river rat. I ended up with
Mm-hmm.
2 patents for my kayak design. I'm a licensed boat manufacturer with the U.S. Coast Guard. I've got a 30-year marriage, so I've completely flipped my life around from bottom to top. I have some
Mm.
supernatural experiences that I don't talk about very often, but when my father was murdered,
Mm.
he was not religious, but my mother was very religious. So I went looking for God to try and get some answers, and I mean, I really, theists give, skeptics a hard time for not being sincere and not really having faith and stuff like that. And they're, that's why they left the religion. And even though I wasn't religious, you cannot be more sincere than a small boy with tears in his eyes begging God for answers. It just doesn't get more sincere than that.
Right.
But apparently, at least the Christian God wasn't taking my calls. So after a while of this silence, I decided to go looking for the devil, because I thought, well, maybe, Christians say the devil's always interacting with he's the king of the world. And so, the earth. So let's go looking for him. And I'm not going to say I found the devil, but I can tell you that I've had some experiences that I still don't have explanations for. There's some really
Mm.
interesting stuff going on out there. But anyway, the long and short of this is that, you know, yeah, my life has been definitely. I've been around the block enough times. The wheels have fallen off, and I had to put them back on and reinflate the tires. As far as
Mm.
that goes, so this is a lot of where this idea of family and brother and sister comes from, because it's very real to me. Because I did not turn my own life around. I had to put in the work, but it was people, a lot of times strangers, who had absolutely no motivation, no personal investment in me whatsoever, who actually extended a hand out to me. When I learned the term fam,
Mm.
it was actually the African Americans in prison who called me fam, who embraced
Mm-hmm.
me as just another brother. You know what I mean? Because they recognize my kindness, sincerity, and humility,
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature. So I do believe very much like what she was talking about when she mentioned racism. And I'm sorry for that tangent I just went on. I'm really
It's
not
all
having a very good
good.
morning.
No,
But
it's perfect, perfect. In fact, I was going to touch on some things to say that from what you're explaining on like objective ethics, this seems to really work well with idealism. In fact, because by locating like moral truth in the intrinsic qualities of consciousness, you can find it objectively. For example, like suffering and well-being are not just abstract constructs, but they're actually direct features of experience, right? So, under idealism, to harm another consciousness is not simply to disturb inert matter, but it's to distort or diminish the shared field of awareness that we all participate in, right? And so, this is why you can see people unify. You can see people unify against people to be cruel. It can work either way. So, I would agree with you that there is some things that you can ground your ethics and morality in, and this is what I say is very useful in the way that we dialogue about consciousness and things like that. It can be very useful, like in our culture. In fact.
well, I do think it does tie into, what she was talking about, what you're talking about here, and what I'm also referring to, where I think we're really on the same page here. When it comes to the divisiveness, she mentioned racism, and if people really understood what is causing that racism, whether it's within other people or their own prejudices within themselves, whether it's about race or gender or sex or whatever, however people want to define things, if they don't like the car or the whatever their neighbors are driving, or they think, whatever their other behaviors are they're so judgmental about, they're not looking within themselves to fix anything. They're looking
Mm-hmm.
for external solutions to what are really internal problems, in my opinion. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what you're talking about, this is caused me to think
Yeah.
about the objective ethics, is that the objective ethics, the reason I believe that this is true is because I believe it's actually one of the laws of nature. So it's an objective fact. And when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about the laws of nature, now we're really tapping into what you guys are talking about with this kind of transcendental governing structure that we exist within, very much like we were talking about mathematics. We exist, the laws of nature are demonstrable
Mm-hmm.
because of the predictions that they can make. right? We
Mhm.
can make using these, we can make predictions. And whenever you can make predictions, that's what makes the scientific method so effective, is because it's about predictions. And I believe that we can make predictions about the laws of nature. And because we can do that, we know the laws of nature exist, but the laws of nature are transcendental. They don't have a substance, right? So now we're
Mhm.
tying this back into this idea of consciousness. So as consciousness now, the laws of nature are what I would maybe refer to as an attribute or property from this consciousness to tie this whole
Mhm.
thing into a nice
Mhm.
bow.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Sophia?
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to say first of all, it sounds like my life story. And I'm sorry for your loss. I've had similar experiences because my mom was murdered when I was 9 years old. I grew up in foster care. I was a drug addict, like same exact story. And then I was introduced into a cult that was run by my own dad, and it was a Christian. He was basically a Christian apologist or a psychopath. And I got forced into Christianity for a while. And I was looking for this God outside of me, and I'm like, well, what the fuck, God? You know what I mean? Where
Oh,
the
I
fuck
do.
are you? And why
Oh,
is
I
this
do.
type of shit happening? And blasey, blasey, blah. And I was just stuck. I was just stuck in that, for a while. And I figured this doesn't make any sense. And I started realizing that, you have to do the inner work on yourself. It's all within yourself. And we've been trained and conditioned to look for something outside of ourselves to save us. And all this division that isolates people, those are narcissistic tactics so that the system stays in place. And we're constantly being divided against each other. And we're told that some savior is going to come from the sky like a silver surfer and save you from this and that and the third. When in reality, the power is with the people and it's in unity. Because everything comes from a unified field. And once we realize that and resonate on the same frequency, do y'all have any idea how powerful we could be? You know what I'm
Oh,
Mhm.
saying?
amen.
And when you
Amen,
realize
sister.
that
Yeah.
within yourself, you you start to manifest things that you didn't even know you could fucking manifest. You start your life completely flips around into a whole different direction. And I'm not saying that struggle is going to completely go away. There's always going to be struggle because struggle is what we experience and find meaning through it. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's
Oh, I
what helps us to
absolutely do.
find that meaning through the struggle. So instead of saying, why is this happening to me? No, it's happening through you, and you're meant to find meaning out of it. And then you just accept the struggle. You just embrace it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you are absolutely batting 1,000 right now. You are so wise. And this is what happens when people go, and it's not to say you don't have to go through a tragic loss like Sophia and I have gone through, because everybody has had their own experiences and they're all equally valid. So it's a matter of what doesn't break you makes you stronger. I'd like to just read one of my premises, if I may, because from
Mhm.
my syllogism on objective ethics, because it really ties into what we're talking about here. My premise number 2 is we are a social species because few working together can accomplish more than many can alone.
Mm. Exactly.
Absolutely. And we just have to, as an idealist, I see kind of uprisings as deeply spiritual because it's basically consciousness reflecting on itself and um, evolving and learning to integrate its shadow. And as it progresses, there's going to be conflict. In order to do shadow work, you have to address those issues and they have to be brought to the surface. And I think we're living in a time right now where there is definitely a lot of dissension, but it's just, those issues that need to be addressed are coming to the surface. So an uprising to me is deeply spiritual because it's consciousness elevating from that lower frequency. I'm sorry, there's people talking. I had to go outside because of my connection. I hope if y'all can hear that, I'm apologizing. Sorry,
You're good.
but yeah, I was just saying that an uprising is it's not really just rebelliousness. You know, it's just speaking up and saying enough is enough. There's also a point in time where we should learn from the struggle and not continue to repeat the same shit. Like if you're not gonna gain any kind of meaning out of it to make experience better, you're just gonna keep going in a cycle and you're gonna be stuck in a trauma cycle. You see what I'm saying? So there needs to be things like uprisings. People
Well,
need
you
to
know,
uh, speak out against those cycles of trauma that we're continuously stuck in, like a loop.
hmm well, you know,
And that's what
we're also
uprisings are
living.
really about. You know, it's
Well,
like you're
yeah, I mean that's very critical because we're living in a time where things like empathy are looked at as woo woo, things like feelings are looked at as not important. Trying to be respectful of other people's feelings and how they react to things. Everybody's discounting them, but yet these are the root problems of shootings. These are the root problems of all kinds of evil. These people are
right.
hurt, and we're trying to ignore it like it's not really that important. We have to. People are like, well, trans people are just crazy. Their feelings shouldn't count. They're not valid. Black people feelings about race is invalid. This happened 400 years ago. Whatever they're mad about doesn't matter. They're invalid. White people, their concerns are invalid. Um, Whatever
I
your
didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
issue is, and it's just really kind of strange where we've come as a society where we're just so willing to be unempathetic, not really caring about each other, as a form of virtue.
Yeah, I really think that this is some really important stuff. And I do believe for the audience, it does actually tie into the overall topic of consciousness. I think it's actually very relative. So I
hmm
don't think we're straying too far off, but I think that we're touching on some things that are really tangible for people to grab a hold of. And I think that what you guys are referring to is extremely important because a couple of things that have been mentioned that really struck me, if I may. First of all, when the sister said that she mentioned narcissism, okay, and my whole feeling about religion is it's not a product of empathy, it's not a product of sympathy, it's actually a very narcissistic type of behavior. The reason I believe that is because as far as I can tell, and again I'm an agnostic, so I'm not saying it's impossible, but as near as I could tell, there is no external God that's interacting with our daily lives. There's no God that gave us, per se, the Ten Commandments or
Right.
the eightfold path or any other whatever religion you want to come from. So what that means is what the evidence seems to be showing is that these are all creations that we've come up with. That means it's coming from us internally, which then in turn means that every claim that a religious person makes about having some type of moral authority or a grounding for knowledge or any of these claims, excuse me, are coming from within that person's own mind, which means that's the very definition of narcissism. You're justifying everything that you do based off of your own ideas, your own
hmm
thoughts, your own motivations. And I'm not trying to be mean to religious people because that's not the goal here. If you look at the definition of terms and you look at the pattern of the behaviors, what I'm seeing is narcissism. I'm not seeing empathy. I'm not seeing sympathy. So I think that's something that people need to really chew on, and maybe it's because even if there is an underlying truth, excuse me, to these religious claims, the behaviors of people are not conveying that appropriately. Because another thing that she mentioned that I agree with 100% is what we have is people are internalizing their external experiences. It's this, which is a natural process. It's obviously something that we
hmm
do. So that in and of itself is not a crime against humanity. The problem is what's our filter? How are we filtering in information and how are we filtering out information? That's the problem that we have. And that's why I think that frequency and harmony plays such a key role, because I could think of, having been in so many diverse situations, I have been many times in my life in a situation where I was the only white person, believe it or not. I was the only English speaking person, right?
Mm.
And so the way that I'm able to navigate those situations and to not just get along and survive, but to actually get along and enjoy company of people that are from such diverse physical features and backgrounds and things of this nature literally comes through tone, and the tone of my
Mm.
voice, you know what I mean, is more
Mm-hmm.
important than the words that are coming out of my mouth. That's how we communicate with animals. Animals don't
Mm-hmm.
have any idea what the words mean that are coming out of my mouth, but I can communicate with animals like everybody else can through tone. And so that
Mm-hmm.
frequency is really, really the most important thing. It's far more important than the language itself.
Very good point. Hey, Caleb, how you doing, man?
I'm
Hey,
doing all
Caleb,
right.
long time no see.
Hey guys, I'm with Objective Ethics here, waking up with my coffee. So,
Yeah, he's a great guy. Gets really great ideas and stuff, and it's so true. The frequency, the tone that's out here in the world today is so low. We have such a
well,
low frequency in our language and discourse.
well, I feel
Well,
like a
you
major.
know, I want you guys to imagine. When I talk about these things, I'm talking about collective consciousness as a whole, right? But I
Mhm,
also compare it to like an individual experience. Like when you have trauma, right?
mhm.
And it's unbeknownst to you, it's operating in your subconscious, right? And it's not until you address the trauma and bring it to the surface that you can deal with it, right? So I would say there
Hmm.
are people in this world who are part of the consciousness as a whole, parts of consciousness that just do not want to face that part. And so what they do instead is they want to shield themselves from what we call karma, right? Which is just, addressing the trauma. And so when they shield themselves from that, they have to oppress everyone else and let them experience the bad shit and let them do all the work. You know what I'm saying? While they shield themselves from every bad experience. And so it becomes oppressive. And that's what a narcissist does. A narcissist basically feeds on your energy, lets you do all the work while you are shielding him from his trauma that he needs to fucking face himself. And so
Hmm.
you essentially become like a slave. And this is what the system is built on. There are parts of consciousness, the unconscious part. I would say that it has a shadow, just like your psyche, an underlying subconscious process that parts of consciousness is not ready to face. And that's why we have this system of oppression. And it's not imaginary, it is real. People say, "Oh, you want to play the victim," but that's what a narcissist does.
Hmm.
If you get raped, which I have been, and you talk about it openly, you literally have men making fun of you and saying, "Oh, you're just playing the victim, or just get fucking over it," and shit like that. You know what I mean? And the
Yeah.
lack of empathy comes exactly from that process, dissociating yourself from anything that is bad that you don't want to have anything to do with. And then if you
Blame the
acknowledge those
victim.
kind of, yeah, if you acknowledge those things, the narcissist can acknowledge it because he built his identity on a false, complete false um construct. And the minute he faces the truth, the floodgates of trauma open and he has to deal with it, and they don't want that to happen. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
I don't
you're
know if I'm making
absolutely.
sense.
No,
I'm
you
kind of
are.
crazy,
You
y'all.
are. No, no, I'm picking up everything you're putting down, sister. I agree with you 100% on everything you said as well. I would like to just throw this out there, if I may, and see what you guys think about this. And I don't want to be rude to Caleb. I know he just jumped in, so I want to hear what he has to say about this. But let me just throw this out there: is what do you guys think about the idea that the ego is what we deal with on the micro level, and consciousness is what we deal with on the macro level. And that ego is essentially on the micro level very much like our receptors are, right? It's something that we tap into with the ego when the ego, tells us that things are happening around us that we need to be aware of on a transcendental and subconscious level. Does that make any sense?
What do you think,
Yeah,
Caleb?
Um, I'd say that seems to track. Like our ego. That's what we're dealing with every single day. It's a
Mm-hmm.
microcosm of the larger picture. It's
yeah. The ego is kind of like more like the masculine energy in the universe. It's like the survival protective mechanism that we all need, to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
then there's also the feminine aspect that we have to get in touch with, the more intimate, the deeper levels of
Hmm.
experience. And it seems like the world as it is right now is dominated by I don't want to sound like some straight up radical leftist, but it's kind of dominated by toxic
uh,
masculinity, man. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
no, uh,
these men
And,
are
and
really afraid of femininity, and it's like, man, chill the fuck out. Like, we all
yeah.
have feminine and masculine
No,
hormones within our body, and we just need to find a balance.
that's no
We're meant to work in harmony, and some
preach.
people express that within themselves.
No,
And what's the big deal? They're so afraid of it. Lord have mercy, man.
no, preach, sister. I'm all about embracing my feminine side here.
Mm-hmm.
But also I was just going to add that yeah, it's all about balance because it's like you hear the word ego and a lot of us want to just automatically think narcissist or but it's like if you have too little ego, well then you don't have any self-esteem at all, and it's like
Right.
you want to have a healthy amount of self-esteem. So it's all about, as you say, Sophia, balance.
Right. You would, I think a man being protective over me is awesome, right? But you don't
Hmm.
want to be dominated either. Like you can go too far with that.
Hmm.
We need to, like you said, we need to find a balance. There's nothing else
No,
to say
no,
about it.
no. Husbands own their wives. Remember that?
Yeah, we'll see
I
about
don't
that.
I don't want to remember that now.
See, it's gonna get to the point where us bitches is just gonna have to take over and show you how it's done, and just
Yeah,
make you get into alignment.
Well, you know
Okay.
what? I, for
yeah,
one, welcome our new women overlords. So,
yeah.
yeah,
Our
you're
new
not wrong,
women.
sister. You're not wrong. Hey, let me just mention here real quick because this is fascinating to me, if
Mm-hmm.
I may.
Yep.
Because so part of my thesis, I guess, is what I'm calling it, is my syllogism about objective morality ties into what I'm referring to as the seven pillars of ethics, and one of the seventh pillar is actually Aristotelian virtue. And what I mean by that is Aristotle talked about virtue as being that perfect medium between excess and deprivation, right? Too much or too little. And I think what the brother Caleb is talking about here with the ego is very appropriate to this. We can't have too much ego, we can't have too little. And what Sophia mentioned, which is something that just literally blew my head right off my shoulders, was the idea that the ego is a masculine form of this. So now, would it be fair to say that the feminine form would be empathy? Or is there a better word to describe that?
No, I think you had hit it right on the nail. And so, like when they use the Bible scriptures, like yeah, there's truth in the Bible, but it's not original. When they talk about the Holy Spirit being the comforter and stuff, they're literally talking about the feminine aspect of God, right? And they don't even understand that. They act like femininity has no place in the world, and they're stupid, you know, because that's when a man works hard, when he's protecting his family, the woman is that feminine touch that makes him feel comforted and helps him, do these things. You know what I mean? And
Oh,
gives
I
him
do.
Mm-hmm.
strength by being nurturing. So when the two work together, you can accomplish a whole lot of shit. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, you're absolutely right. In fact, this is what makes a good partnership, whether you're talking about a man and a woman, or two men, or two women, or two transgender, or non binary, whatever. When you have
Yeah.
individuals, the two people that come together and make essentially one life, is what it's really about. And that's where you end up at your strongest, because
Mm,
for one thing, when you have that investment into a relationship, if you're doing it correctly, in my opinion, is you are basically sacrificing a lot of your own ego to accommodate the other person's ideas and stuff, when you may not do that with the rest of the world. So you could learn a lot from a
Mhm.
relationship and then use those skills to interact with the world. That's my wife is constantly teaching me how to be more empathetic and stuff. And I think that this touches onto what Brother Scott was saying here earlier about the transgender concept or identity. And I think
Well, she's
this is
doing a
something
good
that is
job.
so it's something that's so important, uh, and people who refuse to engage intellectually and empathetically with transgender people, whether they're on the right or the left, I don't care about the politics of it all, but there's a group of people who won't use pronouns. They won't address a transgender woman or as a woman. They won't address a transgender man as a man. I'm actually getting ready to have a formal debate coming up here on the 26th that's about whether or not we should use the Bible to ground society. And of course, I'm on the
mm,
negative position in that debate, because
Yes.
this came
mm-hmm.
up prior to this Charlie Kirk situation, and
Yeah,
a lot
screw
of
that
the
Bible.
it's
Yeah.
insane. A lot of the stuff that's happening with Christian nationalism. So this debate is really,
Oh.
really interesting at this point. But the point of all that is that this guy that I'm debating, the reason the whole debate even came up is because he was basically given an agnostic, not myself, but a friend of mine, a hard time saying that because you're not a Christian, you don't have any grounds for morality. You don't even know what a woman is. And every time
Mhm.
I hear that goddamn statement, it triggers me, because it shows such a lack of ignorance among other problems. And when
Mm-hmm.
you understand what you guys are touching on here, and I want to articulate so everyone understands that
Mhm.
identity is an intrinsic part of our reality, of who
Of
we
your
are.
awareness, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You know.
Experiences and identity. And so
Mhm.
therefore a female can be a man, a
Mm-hmm.
a male can be a woman, because identity is actually tied into who we are. So just because
Mm-hmm.
somebody has a penis or something like that doesn't mean they don't have a or cannot have a female identity. And
That's
it's
right.
more about what this empathy that Sophia is talking about. If
Mhm.
a man or a male can be in touch more with that feminine identity, that empathy, right? That's part of who they are. It's just a demonstrable fact.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, the conscious experience overrides, the
Yeah.
Yeah,
physical
can
thing.
I come
And
into
and
that?
you had well, he had mentioned Aristotelian virtue. Are you familiar with eudaimonia?
No, I'm not.
Uh,
I've not heard it.
so like eudaimonia is basically on that view, it's basically saying that ethics is inseparable from human nature. So to be virtuous is to live in harmony with our rational and social essence and with others the same. So if someone's experience is that of being a trans person, if you want to live harmonious, then you'd want to be empathetic, you'd want
Mhm.
to apply that ethic.
And the thing I wanted to touch upon is
Mhm.
like I feel like one of the biggest enemies of empathy right now is just social media. Like
Oh
the
yeah.
fact that both the right and the left can just live in two completely different realities without even
Mhm.
like knowing it. Like there's the right where it's like where all they see are the bright rosy videos of Charlie Kirk being
Mhm.
a decent person, and then on the left you get all the videos of him being a piece of shit basically.
Mhm.
and
Right.
and it's like we hardly ever interact with each other, and it's
Yeah, to get the full scope, you know.
Well, I do want
but
to push. May I just push back politely a little bit on that,
I'm
Caleb, and ask you a
coming.
question and see what you
yeah,
think about this?
yeah.
Is oh, it's okay. So there's a, for example, there's a Christian, and I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to throw shade on all Christians or all of any people whatsoever, because
Okay.
I had some Christians who really helped me when I was younger, as I mentioned before. There were a lot of Christians who really helped me. I actually worked with the church as a way
Mhm.
to put back into my community. I studied theology in college. I attended seminary. So I've met a lot of really good Christians. But there is a particular Christian who I am trying to get to debate me because he really pissed me off.
Mhm.
Because in his attempt to justify biblical slavery, he
Oh,
has basically
Oh
said that
Lord.
he owns
he's
his,
one of those.
yeah,
Okay.
he basically has gone as far as to say that he owns his children as property. And it's just pissed me off so much. I says, let's have this debate. I want you to be exposed. I want these ideas exposed so that you can get out of your
Yes,
echo
yes,
chamber.
Mhm.
This ties into what you're talking
yes.
about, Caleb, where people do hide in their echo chambers. This guy won't come and debate me on a
Mhm.
neutral platform. He won't come out of the Discord. He's
Yeah.
surrounded by clapping seals that all just agree with everything he says.
Yeah.
And I think that is a problem you're talking about. But I do think that the internet can also provide a much greater
Well,
exposure to ideas that we don't agree with. Is that fair?
no,
Yeah.
I would say I agree with that. So I mean, yeah, I don't think there's any real pushback so far. So
Mm-mm.
because it's not like I'm saying, oh, the internet's the devil. It's this, like I would say take the more nuanced position of like it's both a blessing and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
There, and I would also say like it's this like the whole Charlie Kirk thing. Like it's this like the people want to say, oh, you need to show empathy and all that, and it's like I agree. It's like we they're to lose our empathy would just as a society that's not a direction I want us to go in. But it's like
Right.
also though it's
You
like
know, what I feel
you
bad
can't
about when it
you
comes to Charlie Kirk?
mm,
I feel bad about the fact that he was young and he could have potentially
yes,
changed his mind.
yes,
And, the thing is, I feel like he was just brainwashed, unfortunately.
hmm,
And he basically was just a tool being used. And
hmm,
that's the unfortunate part. You know what I mean?
yes, it
But
is.
at the same time, he was
Yep.
preaching a lot of divisive
Mm.
crap.
Yeah, that's what I
And
was going to bring up next. It's like
yeah,
Yeah.
to
it's like
gaslight me into feeling horrible about it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
kind of hard because the
It's
man literally said empathy is made up.
yeah. No,
He hates
it's
it. And
like I would
yeah,
go
go
with
ahead.
the extreme example of I say extreme because I'm going to bring up Hitler. It's like saying, oh, why don't you feel sorry for Hitler because he's he's human too, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, and I'm not saying, like I'm saying, I'm not trying to compare Charlie Kirk to Hitler because he
Yeah.
definitely wasn't. It's just like Charlie Kirk did a lot of
It's a
terrible
tragedy all
things,
the way around.
and so it's like, how am I supposed to feel sorry for a person who spread so much divisiveness and hatred? Like
Mm-hmm.
he contributed to the culture that essentially brought about his death, and it's like,
Yeah.
which is tragic. It's like I'm not happy he's dead. It's awful, and there are a bunch of people who are celebrating his death, which is insane to me. But it's also insane to
No,
me that the right is trying to silence anyone who's criticizing Charlie Kirk because they're essentially trying to say that if you criticize him, you're committing violence against him or something. It's just,
right. And that's just the problem. Like, you can acknowledge that it's a tragedy and have empathy, but you can also acknowledge that there needs to be some accountability because the same people on the right, they'll say, for example, well, if you're a woman and you're walking down a dark alley with a dress up your ass, you know what I mean?
yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
people are freaks out here, it's dark outside, chances are you're going to get, raped or killed. So you got to have some accountability about your own actions, right? Me
Mm-hmm.
personally, I'm not going to walk around at night knowing there's crazy people out there because I acknowledge reality as it is and I
Mm-hmm.
accept it. And so I have a personal responsibility to also try to keep myself safe. So it doesn't make any
Mm-hmm.
sense to say, but I should be able to walk around naked and a man shouldn't touch me. Yeah, that would be nice, but we know that's not the reality. So all I'm saying is
Right.
when it comes to Charlie Kirk, where is the accountability for the shit that he put out there?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to be able to talk about that so we
Yeah.
can learn from that. so it doesn't happen again. So I would argue that I have more empathy than the fake people, because you're not making anything better. You're just making the same cycle repeat itself,
Yeah.
and more people are going to die because of it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's like, and if you're going to say, oh, Charlie Kirk is a champion of free speech, but then like, well, then wouldn't it be, to honor him, not silence people who, don't
cancel
agree?
Exactly.
culture. Cancel culture, yeah.
And now
And
Trump, they just fired Jimmy Kimmel, and Trump saying it's because he said very bad, very horrible things about Charlie Kirk. But aren't you the same guy who was pissed off at the left? Like, what the fuck? It's like a fucking clown show going on, and we got to do something about this. And we're doing it right now by talking about it.
Yeah, it's like, to me, it's like we're witnessing the death of free speech in America if nothing happens.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that there's something really important that people need to understand, because when it comes to, and I think I'm glad that Caleb brought up Hitler, because that gives us the best, most extreme example that we can use to basically help people to understand the balance of ideas. So we can basically all agree that Hitler was a terrible, terrible human being who committed absolute atrocities, who was responsible for millions of deaths, not just with the Holocaust, but the soldiers who were involved in that war. And we can all agree on that, right? And because of the reality of that, we can all take a collective sigh of relief by saying that threat has been eliminated. That does not mean that we have to celebrate Hitler's death. Even when it comes to
Correct.
somebody like Hitler, we can be like, look, he was a human being, and if humans had evolved to the point to where we need to be, we would have been able to more effectively communicate to baby Hitler that these ideas are toxic, and there would have been an adult Hitler doing all these things. That's what we need to be focusing on. It's not to say that
Exactly. And that's
just because we recognize there's been an elimination of a threat doesn't mean that we celebrate that per se. And the same thing can be said for Charlie Kirk. Yes, I did not agree with Charlie Kirk. I'm a political, what they call an independent centrist, which basically means that I'm just gonna piss off everybody, the left and the right.
Me too.
That's all that means.
Yeah, that's
But,
right. You're in the right place, man.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are.
And I'm a leftist, but I'm not afraid to call out other leftists. So
Yeah.
Well, so many people, and it's not. And one thing, because I do tend to avoid the political sphere because I don't agree wholeheartedly with either side. And so I'm very ignorant of a lot of political issues. I'm not going to even pretend that I'm not. So I might say something that just isn't based in the facts because I don't follow the media and I just hear things and stuff like that. So I constantly have to be corrected or correct myself. And that comes with the territory of just staying uninformed. Part of that is intentional because I find it very disheartening and frustrating when you cannot get. So the way that I see things is that we have this pendulum, right, that swings. It swings to the left and swings to the right. And we know that in physics, everything that's in motion wants to stay in motion until another force acts upon it, right? And if we don't have compromise that as the force that's going to bring that pendulum down to the middle, that thing is never going to stop swinging. It's going to just keep going from one side to the other. And nothing is going to change, in my opinion. So this chart, I don't know where I went off on that tangent, I'm sorry, but this Charlie Kirk situation is, we can look at this as a tragedy that it is, and we can focus on, oh, murder is terrible, and guns can produce so many problems, and blah blah blah, and if that's all we're going to focus on, we will have a singular narrow view of the situation. The irony that Charlie Kirk spoke out against empathy, and yet the right is telling us we need to have empathy for Charlie Kirk, it has not gone unnoticed by me. And I think by a lot of people. The same thing that the sister and the brother were talking about with free speech. He promoted free speech, but now they want to cancel people that are saying things they don't like. This is insane to me. And this is that pendulum that just keeps swinging. It's never going to come to a rest if we do not compromise and bring it to a rest ourselves.
Well, we have to really get together, even whether you're a left or right. We have to really talk about this cancel culture and get to the bottom. Like, do we really want to do cancel culture? Because
here's the thing. Well, first, I just wanted to say this one last thing when it comes to Hitler is like, we we want to focus on the man, but it's like, where did he get the ideas that he, tried to perpetrate? And it's like a lot of the Nazi ideology. It's like they got they got inspiration from just how terrible the U.S. treated black people. So I'm just, but going back to, cancel culture. It's like I'm really tired of like the right saying, oh, well, the left did it for all these years, so it's only fair game. First of all, hypocrisy is just an awful argument anyway. Like two wrongs don't make a right. But it's like these things aren't comparable. It's like you are using the full weight of the government to silence people. That's a First Amendment issue. It's like, you want, the left.
I need to stop on both sides.
Yeah, but it's like, the left, or I don't even know if you want to call it the left, but like, crazy liberals, whatever. It's like, this culture of silencing, conservatives. It's like, that's not a good thing, but it's like, at least I can say though that like that's not, it's, to me, there is a clear line of like, okay, so you said something dumb, consequences of your actions, but maybe the consequences went too far. Like, I don't believe in doxing anyone or, death threats. Like, that's crazy. But it's like, you can at least make the argument that, if you're going to be able to say anything you want, then, there's also going to be consequences. But the consequences should never. But the consequences should never be, oh, the government didn't like what you said, so we're going to, there's going to be legal consequences.
Yeah. And why don't they apply that same thing to advertisers and marketing, like Google marketing? Like, all of these algorithms are set up to use keywords, and they want to trigger you. Like, and they know hot button issues like Charlie Kirk and hate speech, and they would gladly use those things in order to foster their advertising. Well, why doesn't the government do anything about it?
And if I'm going to hold myself to my own standard, it's like, I wouldn't even have an issue with Jimmy Kimmel being canceled if it was like just the audience themselves saying, hey, what the fuck are you doing? That's fucked up. Hey guys, get him off the air. And it's like, if the public decided on their own that they didn't want to listen to Jimmy Kimmel anymore, fine. But it's like the FCC and Trump.
Did you hear that? Caleb, did you hear that Trump was trying to claim that shit? He's like, well, we got fired for having bad ratings.
It's like, give me the receipts then. Where?
Like, I'm pretty sure he didn't even check the guy's ratings, but then he immediately said, and because he said horrible things about Charlie Kirk. That's the real reason.
Well, Trump was targeting Jimmy Kimmel back when he had Colbert fired. He said Colbert's first, now Jimmy Kimmel's next. So he had said that already months ago. So he has already been planning this.
Yeah, and
he was just looking. Yeah.
And now it goes beyond.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. I need to say this real quick. I used to be almost a conservative. And I used to think that Trump is a good guy. And I just want to say to everyone, I apologize. I was so fucking stupid. And I honestly ashamed that I was at one point on that side of the aisle. But a lot of it was coercion and manipulation and gaslighting. But I still take accountability. But I shouldn't have been there. But at the same time, I learned a lot from it. And now I am where I'm at, so I also appreciate the experience. But I just wanted to put that out there because I used to be a different kind of person when it comes to certain topics, and I apologize. And whoever's watching and whoever knows me, I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart.
Apologies are a form of weakness. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I've held terrible beliefs in the past, and so it's like the fact that we can even recognize that they were awful, and we can, we are able to grow as humans.
Yes, exactly.
I was just going to say the last thing I was going to mention was like, this goes beyond Charlie Kirk now. It's like Trump just wants to go after any news network that says anything bad about him. So it's yeah,
of course. And all of this, just to remind the audience, all of this shows how consciousness can exist without a brain.
Yeah, and
So
it's called the shadow. The shadow. This is the shadow at work, the shadow of consciousness, man.
Trump is conscious and he doesn't have a brain.
Like I truly do feel bad for Trump. Like
Yeah.
to think that he could have, like, it's like each one of us has so much potential, and to think that he just got caught in that ego trap, and this is the result. Like, this is the best he can do now. Like, it's
Yeah.
it's sad.
Well,
It
what I see
is.
and how this ties into what Scott was saying about the advertising and stuff like that, it's very. Sorry, my wife is cooking right now. I don't know if you guys can hear that in the background.
Yep.
So at any rate, what this ties into, so I have owned my own businesses and I've actually been involved in marketing, trying to sell my own products. And so for the boats, for example, because I used to work in the adult industry, I had ties to a lot of really beautiful women and good relationships with some of the sisters and stuff like that. And so first thing I did when I went to sell my boats is I put hot chicks on bikinis out there because sex sells, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not innocent in all of this
Yeah.
whatsoever. And I understand that
Mm-hmm.
there's a very powerful subconscious element, and what Scott's saying is exactly right. Keywords are the same thing. There are certain things that trigger a visceral reaction within us subconsciously. And I think what happens, how this ties to what Caleb was also saying, is that these, at the end of the day, these are just human beings, and the significant majority of people are sharing this same commonality that we want to we want to respond to things that affect us emotionally, right? So I am pro-choice. That doesn't mean I'm a pro-abortion, right? It just means that I'm
Mm-hmm.
pro-choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so when you have people who are on one side of the aisle and they start using words like murdering babies, right? This is going to cause a visceral reaction with people, right? It's meant to be an emotional attack. It's no
Mm-hmm.
longer about any of the science or any of the other side story, about the story of
Mm-hmm.
the women themselves, and about how this is really a form of slavery you're talking about at this point when you force women to do these things. They don't want to address those issues
Mm-hmm.
because to them, the when you combine the word, and I should have said that on your stream, I'm sorry, the word unalive with the word baby, this is going to draw a visceral reaction from us. And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
both of these things tie into both of what you gentlemen were saying, is that these people, by and large, do think that they are just tapping into their own empathy, their own emotions. They want to save babies. Well, who doesn't want to save a baby, right? Obviously, everybody does.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
there's a bigger issue here that's more nuanced than that. That if you're going
Mm-hmm.
to just be a slave to your own emotions,
Mm-hmm.
then you're not going to be able to step back from the situation long enough to understand all these different nuances, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's like the pro, quotation marks, pro life side. It's like they always say, oh, well, there's two bodies involved, and it's like, okay, well, why are you elevating the fetus above the bodily autonomy of the woman? Like, but
Right.
that's.
Like when it comes to abortion, I think these people are just like extremists. Religion is blinding them from actually using, logic. While I don't agree that people should just abort whenever, just like use it as a contraceptive and, not practice safe sex, I don't believe that either. But at the same time, like everything is not your fucking business. That's between a woman and her doctor, and simple as that. Like these people are overreaching with religion and using religion to do so, and it's really
Well, I'm.
pissing me off. And I
Well,
normally
it's.
try not to. I was saying I normally don't want to get into politics. I kind of want to be like rise above it all because it affects me negatively. But then when I see things like some dude making his entire life about pointing out how black people are stealing white people's jobs, how we're trying to take over and replace the white man, and all this crazy ass shit, and how they use these fake ass stats to say that we're the ones that are causing the all the violence in America. You're really putting a target on my son's back. I have to
Mhm.
be afraid that my son goes to school one day and some crazy person who was watching Charlie Kirk all day may run him off the road. Stuff like that happens. People get pumped up, go out here in the street and act like they're doing some kind of justice, by killing somebody. And so
Yeah.
that's when I have to speak up and I have to set the record straight. And now I'm being called a racist for saying these things are just not true. And
Well, you
I'm a
were just
racist now.
happy. You
Well,
were
that don't
happy
make
when
sense.
Charlie Kirk. You were happy Charlie Kirk died. Remember? What's his name said that?
Yeah, I was happy. I was happy that what's his name? The two teenagers where one
Yeah.
of them lost their life and got stabbed.
Well,
I was happy
mean,
that the white kid got
yeah.
killed and stuff like that. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
they were saying. But I was just saying,
Well,
like, whatever the outcome is, let him have a fair trial.
yeah.
The days of Jim Crow are over. We deserve due process. Let the process do what it needs to do. But see, these people want it to be like it used to be, where there's a lynch mob that gets to be the judge and executioner before you even get due process. That's pretty much all it comes down to.
And I mean, I'm getting the vibe that all four of us would rather talk about other things than politics, but it's like it's gotten to the point where we have to say something.
I know. It's really crazy. And
And it's like,
but
oh God, man,
Can I
I don't
ask you
even
guys
want
a
to deal with this.
question? Can I ask you guys a question to try and steer this towards the topic of consciousness, which and not to diffuse either, because I think we're actually addressing some really important issues here, and I think we all have a very unique but very important part to play in that conversation. And I'm glad, even though we're generally on the same page, I think that this is the most reasonable position from what I'm hearing from everybody. So I don't want to detract from that, but I do want to maintain this to try and keep tying it to consciousness. Is consciousness, with this universal consciousness, would it be fair to say, so there's a religion, it's called the Self-Realization Fellowship. The founder was a brilliant man named Ramanajas Yogananda. And what they taught is essentially very much like what we're talking about, that we are all aspects of one God, that we are all essentially attributes, which is another way of saying that we're all gods ourselves, so to speak. You know what I mean? But all tied together. And so the idea, his concept was that the whole purpose of life, including all of its struggles and all of its benefits and everything that we're experiencing, is because consciousness wants to know what it's like to feel pain. Consciousness wants to know what it's like to feel joy. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, we talk
I
about
think
this a
that
lot. Sophia, go ahead and explain it, because we talk about
I
this
think it's
daily.
pretty accurate. I wouldn't say that, it necessarily wants to experience pain, but it wants to unravel itself and unravel itself and discover itself. And it's basically doing that through trials and tribulations, mistakes, right? It wants to figure things out and find meanings through that experience in order to perfect itself. So it's pain and suffering is kind of a byproduct of that, I would say. Because when you first, let's say, oh, I want to know how to do this, that, or the third, it takes hard work. You're going to go through mistakes. You may even get hurt. You know what I mean? That's just part of the process, kind of. So I would say
Yes.
it's not that it wants to say, oh, yeah, I want to experience pain, but it's part of it. And we just learn to, or it, I don't know, like consciousness, it's just part of the process. And as human beings, it's better for us to accept that. But then there's also like that cutoff line, like how often do you go through the same thing over and over and not learn from it? And then that's considered insanity. And unfortunately, those are also parts of consciousness that exist. And so that's why you would be called a heretic in the church, because that's to imply that consciousness is not perfect. As they say,
Right.
God is
And it's
perfect and he can't do no evil. But their own Bible says that God created good and evil. So like they contradict themselves. They are not willing to face that shadow side. They want to just act like it's not there. But that's when it does the most damage in the background, because just because you go into denial about it does not make it go away. It's still there, festering in the background, controlling your life until you fucking, take a look at it.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I do try to tie things into things like mathematics, or the most fundamental basic principles that we could possibly get to, so that we can make our abstractions from there, and that they will be then grounded on a more fundamental level
Yeah.
ultimately. And so the idea that we can't get into an infinite regress, or that infinite regress is somehow problematic, I have an issue with that, because how that applies to what you're saying here is that if we, let's say consciousness, whether it wants to with intention or not, but if the natural process is that, and we'll put a positive spin on this, that it wants to experience courage, it wants to experience joy. The only way that you could experience those things is by experiencing pain and experiencing fear, because courage is overcoming fear. You know what I mean? Joy is overcoming pain. And so you get into an infinite regress of the greater the pain, the greater the joy, so on and so forth. You know what I mean? And so just the laws of physics determine that it's going to be an endless cycle, because if there really is an infinite spectrum of modes, kind of like what Spinoza was talking about, the infinite and the finite working together here. There's an infinite spectrum of experiences of joy. That means there's going to be an infinite experiences spectrum of sadness, for example. So it may be inevitable.
Let's see. I mean, to answer your question, I don't think I've gotten into my views with you. I feel like I'm pretty sure this is like the first time we've met. I'm an atheist and a naturalist, and when it comes to idealism, materialism, panpsychism, all that, I'm pretty much on the same boat you're in. I'm agnostic. And I would say, like, if regardless of whether consciousness emerged or is fundamental, I feel like the suffering is just it is just a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's an inevitable part of reality. You know, whether materialism or idealism, we can't escape it. So it's just something we have to deal with. And I mean, and I would say, and I would argue that without suffering, we would pretty much lose all drive and meaning. And so it's like, and
there'd be no future.
Yeah, and that's not to say I'm trying to endorse, let's make as much suffering as possible. It's like, no, it's like as a humanist, it's like I want to reduce as much suffering as possible, but it's like to completely get rid of it. That's, well, first of all, that's impossible anyways, and secondly, yeah, it would just be counterproductive for us. But
if what we observe objectively in reality, in nature, is a reflection of the way reality is, or the ideal of reality, or whatever the case is, then I would just have to conclude that it's amoral and it's more reflexive. So it acts on reflexes rather than intention. So whereas, like, I kind of agree with Carl Sagan, like, we are the universe experiencing itself, but what are we experiencing? So we're experiencing everything, like, depending on who we are, we're experiencing pain, pleasure, and everything in between. And, like, if you look at, like, the deepest level of what we know to be the case about the physical laws of the universe, they appear to be symmetric. So, for example, like the fundamental equations of electromagnetism, relativity, quantum
The
mechanics.
inverse square law.
Yeah, all of that stuff, spatial symmetry. But in practice, though, asymmetry emerges, duality. So in a way, asymmetry emerging in ways seem to be crucial, right? So the most famous example is like the arrow of time. So, like, while microscopic physics looks reversible in different dimensions of time, entropy increases, giving us a clear direction from past to future. So similarly, like in particle physics, asymmetry between matter and antimatter explains why our universe contains matter at all, rather than just canceling itself out. So it seems necessary to have this kind of dualistic observation or experience, or whatever you want to call it. It seems like that duality is necessary, but it doesn't seem like it's intentional. I mean, unless God is an evil God, maybe he gets off on it. I don't know.
I agree with you, and I probably should not have used the word in the consciousness wants to experience, because that's not a really accurate way of conveying it. Because what you're saying with the duality is extremely important, because if we didn't have a certain element of asymmetry, everything would be stagnant. If everything was perfectly symmetrical, we wouldn't have motion. We wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? So we have to have, in order to
Yep.
have motion, we must have
Well,
a certain amount of asymmetry to things.
yeah.
And I think what Caleb talked about is really important when it comes to concepts like heaven. They make no sense whatsoever. You cannot have an eternal bliss because without some kind of pain, without some kind of memory of pain, of struggles, bliss is impossible. It's just a logical impossibility.
Yeah,
So I think that's
semantic
something that,
collapse. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it
Yeah.
has semantic collapse.
And going back to what you're saying, like, I mean, without that asymmetry, it's like, well, we wouldn't even have the universe we have right now at all. It would just be constant, you know, matter and antimatter canceling each other out. Yeah, it's like that asymmetry had to happen in order for everything else to happen.
Yeah, this is why, because of entropy, our experience cannot, in principle, reflect reality as it truly is. Like, our brain states cannot reflect the states of the universe. Otherwise, we would just dissolve. We would dissolve into like some sort of entropic soup. It would all become one mesh, one mush. You know, we have to have this dichotomy in order to make sense of the world the way we do it. At least that's what it seems like. Go ahead, Sophia.
Yeah, this is some deep stuff, and I'm thinking about it because I don't know. I have this vision of like harmony, and that at some point,
Hmm.
humanity could live in harmony without all this suffering. So I would say that, yeah, there's always going to be a process, that can be painful, but we also create a lot of unnecessary suffering. And I think it just all goes back to balance. Theoretically,
Hmm.
if consciousness is trying to experience itself through the physical experience, then the physical
Mm-hmm.
reality is a constant temptation to forget its own
Yeah.
essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so
Yes. Mm-hmm.
it's like the remembering who you are is the most
Mm-hmm.
important thing. And I think it all comes down to how we deal with the suffering. And I think the highest frequency for that would be uh, to deal with things out of love.
Yeah. Yes. No. No. You bring up a great point, Sophia.
And I think that's the highest frequency is love.
Of like needless suffering. Like, to me, it's like we can't. We might, it might be impossible to get rid of all suffering. It's like we're always going to have to deal with natural disasters, aging, death. But it's like there's just so much needless suffering that we could just address and make the world a better place. And we constantly fail to live up to that.
Right. Like take for example a mother, right? When I was pregnant, I went through a lot of physical suffering, physical pain. And but when my son came out and I saw how beautiful and innocent he was, it's like that pain completely vanished, never thought about it again. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
love just kind of makes that all go away. So yeah, the suffering was worth it, So I look at it like that. Some suffering is always going to be a part of reality, but
Mm-hmm.
with love, it doesn't even matter. It was all worth it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I sound like a dumbass.
No, I
no,
mean
not
you
at
make
all.
a
You
good
all sound
point.
absolutely brilliant. And these
Mm-hmm.
examples are so relative. What I would say, if I could just give just a like a 90-second story really quick that
Hmm.
kind of provides an example of this, because this concept of entropy is a whether it's necessary with intention is a whole different discussion, but whether it's a inherent part of reality, which entropy seems to be a fact. One of the laws uh, of physics is that, so we know that we're going to die at some point. That's going to be a type of suffering. We know we're going to experience these things, but our perception of the situation is what really matters the most. So, for example, before I brought my invention, my boats to market, I had to do the testing, the field testing, right? And I was doing a lot of whitewater kayaking to really put it through its paces, big whitewater. And there was one time when I wanted to test the whole design itself and its stability. And so what I decided to do was foolishly make a makeshift seatbelt to strap myself to this thing so that I could really torque on it left and right, because it was so hard to flip over. You'd fall off before you could flip the thing over. And I wanted to just really test how stable this thing was. So I tied myself to it essentially, which was a very bad idea. And I just want to say, as a manufacturer, to cover myself from lawsuits, always wear a life jacket and never seatbelt yourself to a kayak. Okay. You're good to get that out of the way. So here
Yeah.
I am, strapped to this boat, and I had designed a seatbelt that has a quick release function. So all I had to do was pop this lever, and I'd pop free, right? So in my mind, I had a very safe situation, but I did not think competently about the entire situation. And what ended up happening is two elements that really screwed with me. Is, first of all, because I was running in spring water, which is when the rapids are at their best, when you get the mountain runoff, the water was extremely cold. And so I wore a full-size U.S. Coast Guard life jacket. So it looked like a big winter coat instead of just your normal life vest. Okay. And the problem is that was so bulky that it ended up covering up my seatbelt. The other problem is the water was so cold that my hands got frozen, basically numb, right? So I did end up getting myself flipped upside down in big water, and I'm reaching down for my seatbelt to just pop this lever, and I can't find it, and I can't feel what I'm reaching for. And I'm struggling, and I'm struggling, and I'm struggling, and I realize after a long time upside down underwater with my head banging off the rocks and everything else that I am going to drown. That's it. There's no way out of this situation. And so I thought to myself, in this desperate situation, do I want to die panicking and feeling panic and fear, or do I want to die in peace? And so I decided that I was going to die in peace, thinking about my beautiful wife, my family, my friends, the things that I've overcome in life, and just focus on that. And I'm telling you, when you come to a state of peace when you're facing death, that is a state of peace that is undescribable. I've done a lot of drugs and a lot of other crazy things, and I've never felt a state of ecstasy like this, right? And so the moral of this story, well, first of all, obviously I did end up getting myself righted because I'm alive to talk about it. Well, just to finish that story so people understand, as I basically given up to just accept this death, and experiencing this state of essentially nirvana, I would call it. This loud, audible voice came from within myself. Maybe it was this from consciousness itself that says, Danny, if you do not flip this boat over, you're going to drown, and your wife is going to be sad, your friends are going to be sad, and everything else. And so I made one last effort to just forget the seatbelt idea and just use my hands to push, just slap at one of the sponsons. And because the boat design inherently, it's not self-righting technically because there's no internal mechanism, right, that causes it to flip itself over, but it wants to be right side up because of the design itself. So I probably caught a lucky wave at the same time, and I just got myself flipped back over, right? So here I am today. But the point of all that is that when we embrace this finality, right? This is the way that we handle this entropy, and it's the perception that makes entropy and makes death and makes this finality of this particular existence worthwhile, beneficial. Everything that you go through in life suddenly becomes absolutely worth it. So, do you see how this ties to what we're talking about with this? You know, death is not just because we don't want to die and we don't want to suffer and we don't want to drown. I didn't want to drown to death, obviously, but your perception of the situation can absolutely turn that into the most powerful, most peaceful state you've ever been in your entire life. I guarantee it.
Hmm.
Yes, and it has to do with acceptance, as simple as that. You chose, you made a conscious choice to, you know, change your perspective on it. And I think perspective is very powerful.
And it
You know,
sounds like
you could have died. You could have died in like a state of panic. And I wanted to just add a little bit of a story. It's not going to be that long, but my granddaddy, when he died, before he died, he looked up at the ceiling and he said that the sky was opening up and there were purple violets coming down from the sky. And whatever he saw was so beautiful. You could see the light sparkling in his eyes. And that's how he went. And so that's how I knew death is not always, this horrible, horrific thing, because the way my granddad died, it basically imprinted itself into my mind. Like, I could never stop thinking about it. But when my grandma died, you know, she was in a state of, you know, panic, and her face looked all distorted, and it just looked like she had a horrible experience. So there's different ways that you can, you know, leave this experience. And I think your conscious choices has a lot to do with that, your perspective. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to say, it sounded like your acceptance of death is what actually saved your life. Because it's like, in that panic state, would you have thought to have done what you did to save your life? You know?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
very
because
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting, Caleb. Frankly, had not thought about that before. I attributed it to this, like I said, this loud voice that I do believe, as much as it was internalized, I do believe it was external, and I don't tie it to any gods or anything like that. Who knows? Maybe it was, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that it ties into what Scott had brought the topic today. This consciousness, consciousness, this universal consciousness, just basically told me what the facts were. The bare bones facts were, hey, listen, brother, you are drowning to death. You are going to drown to death. This is
Mm-hmm.
going to be your last shot at this if you don't make a real effort, and so it's very interesting to snap yourself out of that state of nirvana to
Mm-hmm.
to to make a different choice, because my choice to live, to pull myself out of that state of nirvana and peace, because I just don't have the words to explain how peaceful it is to be able to embrace death, to hold it by the hand, like what the sister was talking about with her grandfather. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody came to him and said, listen, we can give you a shot really quick and it's going to give you another 5 years on your life, I can pretty much guarantee he would have said, he would have wanted to say no thank you, and if he said yes, I'll take the shot, it would be because of his empathy for his surviving family members, his children, his grandchildren, and great grandchildren, not because he wanted to get out of that state of nirvana. And I didn't really either, to be honest with you. And I'm not suicide, whatever, if I could say that word on your thing, I'm not wanting to self delete by any stretch of the imagination.
Hmm.
I went through that process when I was younger, and I had to overcome that, because there was a time as a child, overcoming my father's murder and stuff, that I did have a gun in my own mouth, and so I had to overcome that. And I love
Mm.
life. I've embraced life, and I want to live. But when you can embrace death peacefully, not in sadness, that's a tough thing to pull yourself out of. And it was my empathy for my wife and the very people I was thinking about, that
Mm-hmm.
probably gave me this
Yep.
awareness that, okay, this is a situation that I can fix if I give it if I really slow my mind down, stop panicking and grabbing for things that aren't working, and make a different, to attack this from a different angle, just like
Yeah.
Caleb was saying.
Higher,
That
higher
probably did
frequency.
save my life.
Yeah.
interesting. What's interesting is, not to say, I mean, I've had near death experiences, but I suffered from sleep paralysis my entire life. And I wasn't able to conquer it until I did exactly that. I would calm myself down. I would say, you know what? I can get myself out of this. But before, it would always be panic. I would feel like I'm going to die. Not so bad during the times where I was doing drugs. I would do drugs just to stay awake so I don't experience it. And it was like horrible. You know, I was going through that shit every time I fell asleep. And so after a while, I did exactly that. I changed my perspective, and I consciously made a choice to get out of that state. And then I would get into this calm, peaceful um, state. And then I would snap out of it. And how I ultimately defeated this whole paralysis shit that was happening to me. It was very similar to what you described, except I wasn't actually dying, right? But it felt very, very similar. And I just find that very interesting, what you
Well,
said and
yeah,
how you did that, because it's very similar.
and not only that, it's very applicable to the topic. Like, can consciousness exist without a brain? Like, I was thinking about the what reality means. What do we mean by reality? When we mean what can be objectively shared among people in their experience. Like, we all see the moon, the sun doing what it does, evolution, all kinds of different scientific observations, things we can objectively verify, measure, predict, and see it happen over and over. And this is considered, what we call reality, right? And we determine reality through our conscious experience. It's the only interface we have to the outside world. But there's something really interesting about the brain, though, when we talk about the brain's role in all of this, is we have the default mode network, right? And that's like a set of brain regions, I guess, like including the prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and all of this stuff is involved in self-referential thought, like the inner narrator, the autobiographical memory planning, sense of space, I as opposed to you, duality, all of that stuff. And all of this stuff is very real to us objectively. We all experience these same sort of appearances in our consciousness.
Mhm.
But when you turn the default mode network off, like say through maybe near death experience that can happen, maybe through hallucinogens, meditation, you start to experience reality different. You start to, all those boundaries dissolve. The sense of I dissolves. The sense of time, goes away. The inner narrator goes away. And you start having this other reality experience, right? And you know it just, and it's objective in the sense that everybody can have that same experience, just like everyone has the same experience when their brain is acting normally and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny how you can turn off parts of the brain, and instead of consciousness just going away, it just changes radically the way that you experience reality. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And it's very interesting because I'm listening to all three of you, and you are all brilliant thinkers. Just like I said about Scott and Sophia when I started, Caleb, you're on their level as well. Very intelligent, very insightful. And I'm listening to all three of you talk about these different things from different angles, and I'm tying it all together organically in my own mind here, thinking about, okay, let's take a piece of what Caleb was talking about here with natural disasters and what he referred to as unnecessary suffering and things of nature. And let's tie it to what Scott and Sophia are saying here about experiences, right? And meditation and the focus on the internal self. This seems to me to be the solution that I think we're looking for in society that we were talking about. So if every individual meditates on their own internal consciousness, right? Their own internal critique, and we focus on that and fix that first, that allows us to be organically empathetic to my neighbor, right? And everybody else in the world, because now I'm starting to recognize through consciousness that we are all connected. And then because of the asymmetry that is necessary for for reality to be real, we tie in Caleb's concept of this unnecessary suffering, these natural disasters. So humanity can mathematically, if I'm correct here, come together as a unified body. We can all agree on everything. We can all get along. We can all support each other. We can be completely and absolutely empathetic with each other. And that does not bring us to stagnation, because the natural disasters are going to be that asymmetrical element that continue to keep us, moving along, so that it moves things along so that everything can recycle.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead,
Yes,
Sophia.
I agree. Yeah, I was just saying, I agree. It keeps you on your toes. And, um, I believe as a collective consciousness, we can get on the same page. And I think that the whole thing about, the return of the Christ is exactly about that.
Yeah.
It's about remembering our true nature, and that it's actually a unified field, right?
Mhm.
And once we return and remember that, the more that we do, the more that we get into harmony with one another. This could be described as the return of the Christ, but it's talking
Yeah.
about a consciousness, a
I
conscious state.
believe.
Yeah, I mean,
Not-
and I think what objective ethics is saying here, it's like, to me, we would all be better off if we had a cosmic perspective of the
Mm-hmm.
world. It's
Yep.
like, we are all made of the same stardust. We are all made of the
Mm-hmm.
same elements in the universe.
Yeah.
We are all
And realizing
interconnected.
that there's truly no separation.
Yeah.
The only thing
Yeah.
that separates us is our thoughts. Like, I can choose to think that, ooh, I don't want to talk to Caleb because I don't know, he's got gray
Hmm.
hair, and I don't think he should have gray hair. Stupidity, you know.
I
I
got
mean,
cooties. Yeah.
it's stupid. Like at the end of the day, like you're a human being. You experience a
Yeah.
lot of the same things that I experienced. We're all having a collective experience, you know, and we
We
need
can
to
grow off
start
that. Yeah.
bridging that. Yeah, we need to bridge that gap. And I think
Hmm.
religion does it a big disservice because religion is tied directly to supremacy, in my opinion, because it basically preaches that or states that you are chosen and you're special and you're other and you're something different from the rest. And you need to lord over the rest to make the rest do what you want them to do. That's an oppressive system. That is not, that's not reality. That's a false god, so to speak, that these people worship. And it's the ego. Like objective ethics said, you know, people created this god. People create this crap. You know, it's not real. What's real is that we all should be unified.
Hmm.
And strength is in unity. If we want to see a change in the world, just use your common sense. You can't be constantly at war with each other because that's
But you know what?
cancel culture right there,
But
you
you
know?
know what? But you know what the good thing is though about the Bible is it doesn't matter what you believe. You can actually support any of your beliefs using it. So you can't go wrong. For example, you can believe in abortion on the Bible. You know, like Numbers 5:11 through 31 talks about how you can kill the child of the cheating wife by having her drink this poison, this bitter drinking water in the tabernacle that'll force her baby to die because she had
What kind of word
committed
is even
adultery.
tabernacle, man?
You know, or you can be
That's some
against
weird
abortion.
shit.
You know, there's scriptures for that too. So,
Yeah, that's the problem with
Tabernacle.
that's one thing I'm going to be hammering down on in my debate. And I don't want to give up too much of my debate tactics just in case my opponent happens to catch this
when
video.
is it?
But
Before you
the
go on, when is this
26th,
debate? 26.
yeah,
Where?
it's going to be the
I
26th. It's
want to
going to be
see
on.
that.
Okay,
Yeah, I
I gotta
September
link up with you
26th.
somehow. Like you got a channel or something.
yeah, I will definitely. What I will do is I will get you
I'm
guys
sorry.
a link. I believe that the gentleman who's hosting the debate is making the link this weekend, so I should have an active link for it soon. And I will go ahead and I'll send it to you in an email, Scott. You can share it with many people as
Perfect.
possible because I do want that. I do feel like this is a very relative and very important topic because it's going to tie into Christian nationalism, even though that's not technically the topic. But when you talk about should we use the Bible as the best grounding for society, that's a natural progression to that. So I think it's just a really important thing. But now I completely forgot what I was going to say about the other thing. But
Well, believe it or not, me and Sophia, we've had some interesting Christian debates on our channel too.
oh, that's what I was going to say.
And just to
Yeah.
let you know,
So when
people
it
do
comes
not
to
like
this,
me. I'm letting you know right now. Make sure you have no problem being affiliated with us because people cannot stand me.
They
no,
I
can't
don't know
stand
why.
us.
I
the
have
thing about, like I mentioned
friends
before,
on that.
the thing about being an independent centrist is I'm always just pissing off both sides. I'm not going to win, no matter who I'm friends with or
Hmm.
who I'm affiliated with. It's somebody's going to have a problem. There was a absolute disaster that happened here a week or so ago. There's a gentleman who's a Christian who I've had several very polite and civil debates with, and we don't agree. I know if we agree on much of anything, but we've always had very polite discussions. And I met an atheist who also comes on his channel that has polite discussions. And so I started following this atheist channel. And I'm not going to name names because I don't want to, run people through the mud here. But after this Charlie Kirk situation happened, the Christian is a conservative, the atheist is a liberal, as far as I understand. And if they don't like those labels, I do apologize, but that's just kind of how I see it. They're definitely arguing from those positions. And I was having a very interesting discussion with the atheist on his channel, and the Christian came in to join the conversation, and within 60 seconds, it turned into an absolute rage fest, where
Oh
these
my
people
god.
are just, I mean, shit hit the fan. And I'm friends essentially, if you will, with both of these people. You know what I mean? So it's just really
Mm.
interesting. I can't win. But when you talked about the Bible and stuff, this is something I'm going to be hammering down on in my debate is that one of the primary reasons that we cannot use the Bible for the grounding of society is because of exactly what you gentlemen are talking about here, is the internal, the contradictions. You can't use something for grounding if it's internally contradictory. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's completely untenable at that point. So, and you're absolutely right about it. You can justify literally anything. You could twist the words around, which you have to do if you're going to try and harmonize things. You just eliminate the text that you don't like. You just focus, you cherry pick the things you do like. I mean, this is what religion does. And it's interesting because this divisiveness that religion is seems to be a organic byproduct of our our hyperactive detection agency, our hyperactive agency
Agency
detection
detection.
device.
Yep.
Yeah, HADD, because we have a need biologically. We talk about the central cortex. When we talk about the brain, there we have this need to ascribe agency to things, and so this God of the gaps is basically a very natural thing that we do. And so that ultimately evolves, or I would say devolves, into religion. And religion devolves into religious dogma. And you have this us versus them that spawns from that. So it's
Well,
like
can I
mold
give you?
or like a
I'll give you some
virus.
advice. I will give you some advice because on that line of argument, what we've kind of learned is what Christians will normally do in those cases is they'll say, well, if the brain is always trying to deceive itself through hyperactive agency detections, type 1 and type 2 errors, things like that, if that's really true, then how do you know what you're saying should be taken seriously? Why should I listen to you? Because you're grounding it on blind processes in nature, where I'm grounding my philosophy on the mind of God. So while you're grounding yourself in, it's kind of like what they'll tell you objective is what you're arguing for is saying, well, we've got a can of Sprite and I've got a can of soda. I'm going to shake both the cans up. I'm going to pop them open, and they're both going to fizz because of the chemical reactions. Now tell me, which can is telling the truth, Sprite or Coke? And obviously the answer is none, because it's just a chemical process. And they'll say, and this is why we don't trust you, because even on your own grounding in naturalism, you're self-refuting. You're cutting out the knees under you to trust you.
What they're trying to do, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, what they're trying to do is hide behind hard solipsism and then giving themselves a back door by claiming that there's a grounding in this God. And this doesn't get them away from hard solipsism. I have this debate with Christians all the time about this. They say, "Oh, I have the grounding for intelligibility. Right? I have the grounding for
Right.
truth." And you say, "No, you don't. Your grounding doesn't get you around hard solipsism. You don't have any more or less grounding, because at the end of the day, it's your own mind, your own subjective understanding that's going to then give this thought any credibility, any credence, right? So we're in the same boat. The difference between us is that I'm using Occam's razor here by going with naturalism because it's the shortest distance, it's the straightest line. You are adding an element,
All
and
these
you haven't,
properties.
right, and they haven't justified that that element needs to be added, and then they don't understand that they have to then explain the infinite amount of justifications for that element. You know, once you add a God into the picture, it creates so many more problems. It doesn't solve anything. You know,
No, and the thing I always bring up with that is like, it's like you are trusting that the Bible is a reliable source about the nature of God. It's like, it's completely possible that this is an evil God, and so you can't trust God at all for your intelligibility. It's like,
Yeah,
Right.
you don't happen to think it is, because it's a false construct anyway. It's a construct of supremacy and oppression, period. I mean, just look at the history of it all. Have they ever done a good thing? I mean, yes, individually speaking, there are good individuals who identify as Christian, and I'm not speaking directly to them, but let's look at the institution, because that's what it is. Let's look at it. What has it done for this world? It's keeping us back. It's holding us back, honestly.
Well, it kept the whores from getting away with their sex with husbands when they weren't really virgins.
I mean,
You
Yeah,
know.
but while they're talking about whores and prostitutes, like, they are in the alleys at night paying for them and
Killing them.
doing little things to little boys and stuff like that. Like, there's some fucking hypocrites, man.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Abs-
if I were to be as objective as possible, it's like I can at least think of a few things that the church as an institution has done good for, like, you know, the creation of hospitals and universities. But then I would also say, though, that those things only got even better once they became secularized. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, because before that, they
Um,
were just indoctrination places, like those reform schools and shit. You know, like, come on,
mm-hmm.
forcing
Yeah.
people to completely disconnect from their heritage and doing things that don't feel natural to them,
Oh.
and not allowing people to, you know, like, what's good for me may not be good for you. It's simple as that. We're all different.
Yeah.
You may be able to eat stuff that if I eat it, I have an allergic reaction. You can't force everybody to do stuff the way that you dictate. Everyone's different. We have different genetics, and it's just wrong. It's freaking wrong. I don't know what else to say.
Well, I mean, don't even get me started on the re-education schools that both Canada and the U.S. did for Native Americans, you know, and the mass graves.
And it still makes me angry. And then when people say get over it, I'm like, get over it. It makes me still mad today because a lot of us don't know our roots. A lot of us don't know how to, you know how you know when stuff is hereditary in your family, you're well informed about what you should do, what you shouldn't do to keep yourself more healthy. A lot of us don't have that kind of information and go through a whole lot of trial and error and do things to ourselves that ain't even good for us. And then we find out the hard way because we know absolutely nothing about our heritage. You know, it's horrible. And for people to say, oh, get over it, happened a long time ago, they don't understand how it still affects us today.
It's like the whole thing with, like, when white people are upset that black people are allowed to celebrate their blackness, but not the other way around. And it's like, well, first of all, there's a good, you know, if we look at history, whenever white people celebrate whiteness, it never turns out all right. But secondly,
it's always
it's
a
like,
hanging involved.
and secondly, it's like, why do you need to feel to celebrate it anyways when you have a rich heritage where you can, like, trace back your entire family on both sides, probably. It's like black people celebrate their blackness, at least specifically in the U.S., because it's like they can't do that. It's like they can't look back into their heritage and celebrate their ethnicities and their family lineages. It's like you force this upon them. So, like, get it the fuck over it.
Yeah, and that's all we have. So, like, why do you want to? We're trying to start from scratch, and we're trying to, solidify our. We need some type of grounding. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everybody needs some kind of grounding because that's just important. And so what I did, I came from Germany because I'm a military baby, and a lot of people think because I'm from Germany, I ain't got no say so, but I still today have the last name of our slave master. I'm just saying, I'm straight up. I come from that because my people on my dad's side, they came from French slave plantations. And so I'm a direct descendant from that as well. But I didn't have any clue about it because I grew up in Germany. But then when I came to America, I really researched my roots, and it helped me a lot because I was always kind of a weird person with weird experiences. And then I realized that, I'm part Choctaw, and the way that they believe things was completely identical to my own perspective. And so that gives you grounding, that gives you confirmation, that lets you know I'm not crazy. That's my heritage. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is how I function. This is how I operate. And so now I'm able to nourish and nurture myself the way that I need to be. Because, like I said, the European way may not be the way for everyone else. You know what I'm saying? You have to be able to do what's good and what resonates with you. You know what I'm saying? And when you're robbed of that and you don't even know who you are, how the hell are you supposed to, make sure that you're good?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, sure, in a perfect world, it would be weird to look at black people celebrating blackness, but it's like we don't. It's like you were robbed of so much because you were so many of you were brought over as slaves, and your heritage, your culture, it was all beaten out of you, and your
Yeah, and
history.
You
then the
know,
damage it did to and the damage it did to people psychologically. My dad's a perfect example. That dude was
Mhm.
a walking pillar of trauma, and he
Yeah.
was a complete psychopath that never got the help he needed. And even in this generation, we're still suffering the
Mhm.
backlash
Yeah.
from people who just ain't had their mind is just fucked. You know what I'm saying?
but see,
Mhm.
people, the reason people reject other people's history and everything is because they want to feel that superiority. It's like a couple weeks ago, I went to my brother's house. I have a brother, half brother. He's black, and when he was coming up, when we were going to school, of course, he lived in the hood, and we had a friend. His name was Jeff. He's a little rich white kid. Used to go to school with us, and it turns out his dad like owned one of the biggest, construction companies here in town. Like it goes years back, goes way back. Like he inherited wealth. So when Jeff grew up, he inherited his dad's business. In his business, he had all kinds of built-in customers, grandfathered in, had all kinds of equipment, people work for him, different facilities, just all over the place, making millions of dollars. And he inherited all that. And his business is still doing good to this day. So, anyways, Mark, my brother who came from the hood, he
Mhm.
started his construction business too. And when he was in his late 20s, and now he's doing pretty good. Anyways, I went over to Mark's house a couple of weeks ago, and Jeff was there, and they always argue and clown each other because Jeff is always like, yeah, that's that old poor boy Mark. I remember y'all when y'all were in school, old poor boy Mark. Now he went and got him a construction company and doing good. I'm glad to see it. And but he goes, man, you need to try to do this, that, and whatever. And they started arguing, and he's like, and Mark's like, yeah, well, it's easy for you to say all that because you inherited your construction business. It was already doing successful. He's like, no, all you got to do is, Mark, that's the problem with black people. Y'all don't know how to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and
Mhm.
stop making excuses. You can do it too. You can do it too. It's called
Uh,
taking accountability, and all this kind of stuff. And he don't get it that he's got a history that he's unaware of that's
You
gave
a
him that
hedgehog,
privileged
motherfucker.
position. It's like I
see,
can't stand when people do
that's
that.
that's that privilege word that
Yeah,
conservatives are don't like.
exactly. And he's a big Trump guy too.
They'll tell you, I started from scratch. I didn't have nothing. I come from a poor family and all this stuff and
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, no, you don't.
Yeah.
Well, there's
It's just
something.
But you know what? At the end of the day, they're right because we are actually pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps, and we are trying our best to stay sane, and we're not going to
mhm,
give up the fight. So they're right. We're not going any damn where. We are coming up, and it's a beautiful thing.
yeah.
Well, there's
I
something
mean, it's
interesting that
yeah.
I see here, if I may, just real quick to
Yeah.
this here, because I think that when we're talking about history and where we come from, backgrounds and stuff like that, and I think the fascinating thing is to tie this into something that was brought up earlier with the theory of observation, right, and the effect
Mhm.
that the observation has on reality. And the fact of the matter is that because time is essentially what we're talking about linear, right? When we observe something, the moment we actually observe something, because everything in reality is still moving, it's still
Mhm.
progressing. So technically speaking, what we're observing at the very moment we're observing it is in the past already.
Mhm.
So what we do is when we are able to reflect on the past, it gives us an opportunity to then make assessments and judgment calls of how we want to shape the future. And we're
Mhm.
constantly
Exactly.
looking at the past. And so we're
Mhm.
constantly having this real time example of what our choices are producing. It's not that we have to look 100 years into the future. Every moment is a look into the past. And we're literally seeing what our previous decisions have produced. And we're shaping the next future decision. And so it's happening in real time.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh my God. I just love how you said that because that is so true. And I struggle with like saying what I mean. So you just kind of clarified that because that's all I'm saying. it's not that we trying to stay stuck in the past and say feel guilty for it and burn at the cross. No, we're not saying that. We're saying let's have compassion for one another. Let's take into consideration that certain things have affected people a certain way. And I always say, for example, the Black community needs a lot of healing and a lot of mental health. You know what I mean? And we need to look at these underlying things if we want society as a whole to get better, and not just the Black community. There's a lot of stuff going on in society, but we need to look into the past and we need to learn from our mistakes. And that's the only reason we should look at the past, you know?
Exactly. Like, maybe, you know, I sometimes say, oh, this is like the leftist in me, but I would just say it's just the human in me. It's like, you know, we can't like look at current day, you know, like the Black community or like the gay community and be like, oh, well, you know, the things that happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago, is that, you know, we can just ignore that. It's like, no, it's like, you know, for the majority of U.S. history, you know, Black people were slaves, and then we had like 100 years of Jim Crow law, and it's like they only gained civil rights in the 60s, like that. That's you know, within our grandparents' lifetime, and it's like, you know, things that affect the past don't just magically disappear. Like with redlining, it's like there's a reason why Black people are still living in the projects. It's like redlining.
It's like, you know,
and it's hard
like
to get out of the project because of the way that it's designed.
Yeah, on any level, like even like the little story I was saying, like with the white guy, he came from a rich background, and as much as he likes to brag about how hard he worked to make that business what it is, I guarantee you my brother Mark worked probably 3 times harder just to get where he was at. And so, you know, Jeff, he's wondering, well, Mark, you're not where I am because it's your fault. Don't blame it on me. I didn't have it easy. And if I can do it, you can do it. And that's like a failure to understand that Mark came from the hood, poor, no money, no support, you know, no father in the home, you know, and still just to do this is great for him. But you can't, that's like comparing apples and oranges, you know, because of that background. But people like to ignore history because it makes them feel they're all on equal playing ground. And people that are doing good want to feel like they're special. Oh, I'm doing better than Black people because I'm better than them, you know, but you don't look at the history, you know. And you would think this is all common sense, but I guarantee these people are so stupid they actually believe this kind of
Well,
crap.
the other problem is they're so detached from reality that they do not appreciate the strength that comes from the struggle. So when I mentioned the cleaning business, when I turned my life around, I was sitting in a jail cell. I was sitting in a prison cell, you know, I had all the time in the world to do push-ups and all kinds of stuff, you know, and just think and think and think. And I made that decision. Okay, I want to be a better man outside of the joint than I was, you know, to get me into the joint. So once I got out, because of my criminal record with drugs and high-speed police chases and that kind of nonsense, I could not get a job pumping gas. I couldn't get a job at McDonald's. I applied everywhere I possibly could, and I nobody would hire me. And so now a lot of that had to do with the economy and the fact that we were in a major recession. Nobody was hiring anybody. And so I started my cleaning company out of desperation. You know, I had to do something. And because so many people, Americans in particular, and I hate to generalize, but you know, I would say, well, I would really say more than being a white issue or a person of color issue, it comes down to an issue of comfortability with living in America versus being an immigrant. But most Americans won't clean toilets for a living. They're too proud to do it. They're too used to they're growing up and having their mama do it for them or their wife do it for them. And so they don't even, a man doesn't even have the fortitude to get down there and clean up a dirty toilet. You know, it's so funny how tough guys think they are. But anyway, so when you go through that struggle and you literally build yourself from the ground up, you develop this incredible strength and this strength of character, this work ethic, this integrity, and all these things that other people who get things handed to them on the quote unquote silver platter have absolutely none of. They don't have any of these qualities whatsoever. And yet they're so quick to point their finger down at people and look down their nose at people and act as if they're in some kind of superior position. And this to me is an indication of, I said that we're all part of one race, the human race, which is why I refer to people as brother, sister, family. And that goes for transgender people as well. Everybody. I don't care what your background is. The thing about it is there is a split in society, though, and in the world. All globally, this is true, and it has to do with the people that have versus the people that have not. The rich versus the poor. That's the division. It really
So
comes down to that. It's not even about religion or politics or anything else. It's not about
Yep.
skin color. It's about, I've got more than you. I'm going to align myself with people that have more. I'm going to use this as it makes me feel superior. I don't care if I don't have a good work ethic. I don't care if I don't have strength of character. I've got resources. And that's ultimately what we're all struggling for, is resources. It just feeds into this kind of a concept.
yeah, there are those who hoard all the resources, and then there are those who barely have access to resources. And the hoarders are saying, well, too bad. It's a dog-eat-dog world, you know? And really, who is the actual problem here? It's the corporations and the billionaires, but they own the politicians who are constantly dividing us, so we can lose sight of that. So we can sit here and tear each other apart while they continue to hoard and continue to shield themselves from having to develop character through struggle.
The people that are in charge want us to think it's about race. They want us to think it's about gender. They want us to think it's about religion. But I guarantee you that they know for a fact that that is completely irrelevant. And just like what Sophia said at the very beginning of this conversation, the last thing that the people in power want is for us to all start working together. That's the last thing they want.
Oh yeah, no.
That is the last thing. Because if you think about it, the people that have been assassinated historically were people who were bringing people together. Like, people underestimate Bob Marley. Bob Marley, he was a musician, but he was a revolutionist. And what he did is, he didn't see color. He believed in oneness. And he was so powerful, he was able to get politicians who had been against each other for years. He got them to shake hands on stage, and he brought people together. And they tried to assassinate him. It was a failed assassination attempt. So whenever you try to, awaken people and call them to unity and to stick together, they're going to come for your ass straight up. Because in history, they have always, even not Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, he was like, screw the left, screw the right. You know what I'm saying? It's all a fucking game. And they're just using you as a football and tossing you to and fro. When you preach independence from this stupid ass game, and when you preach that people should rise above it so they can get together and actually reclaim their power that they actually have, they're gonna come for your ass. They don't want unity. It's simple as that.
Oh yeah, like the ruling class has convinced the masses of a lot of delusions, like that we live in a meritocracy, that we,
and they're using tactics of a cult, of what a cult does. Because what does a cult leader do? And I believe I had that experience with my dad being a cult leader for a reason. I was supposed to learn something. A cult leader divides everyone that is so-called under him, so that everyone can continue to compete for his attention and for his whatever you try to get out of it. And that's what they're doing. They're pitting us against each other, and we're all trying to use the government to enforce our own ideologies. And we're all competing for the government, who doesn't give a fuck about none of us.
Yeah, like they've convinced the masses that successful people are morally good people, and if you're poor, you made bad choices, that it's your fault. You have poor moral character if you're poor.
Dumb.
Yeah, they've convinced
you're just
us.
dumb. You should be euthanized.
They've convinced us that the most important things in the world are these pointless culture wars against trans people and immigrants.
Yeah. It's
and
they gaslight you.
People, look at the persecution. Look at the persecution that gay people been through for I don't know how long. Like, they always anything that doesn't conform to their false god.
Mhm.
And see, this is the problem, is that having a non-dual sort of philosophy is kind of hard to get with because it's not very intuitive. Because all we see is our differences. All we see is the other. You know, that's what navigating reality is all about, so that we don't bump into objects all day long. So we see other all the time, and we navigate accordingly. And so the thought of us being one thing fundamentally is just kind of alien to Western forms of thinking right now, you know, and just trying to figure out ways that we can become more unified in our thinking. This is why, you know, we promote like philosophies like idealism, non-dualism. But is there other ways that we could maybe pull people together rather than always seeing this duality, do you think?
I do. I think that it's really a lot of what you're talking about today with your prompt about collective consciousness. The problem is that what I was alluding to earlier is that, you know, this duality, as far as I'm concerned, it's a demonstrable fact. It's just part
Mm-hmm.
of nature. You have to, in order for something to be identified, you must be able to identify its opposite, right? The opposite
Mm-hmm.
is the contradiction is ingrained in the thing that it is. And so, you know, we talk about things like so much of the political topics we're talking about in slavery and stuff. It reminds me, and duality, it reminds me of the first person in history that we have a really good record of who was trying to essentially abolish, not technically abolish slavery, but was making a social change to more of an equality type of a concept when it comes to slavery, religious freedom, and things like that, was actually Cyrus the Great, believe it or not. Goes all the way
Mm.
back to like the 6th century BC, before the Common Era, because he taught these concepts, right? This religious freedom. This is why he let the Jews go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple,
Mm-hmm.
and he referred to Yahweh as their God and stuff. Now he was a Zoroastrian, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people think that Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion, but technically it's not, because Ahura Mazda is the only uncreated being. But there is a major element that's intrinsic to Zoroastrianism, which is dualism, and it's this necessary um, aspect of creation itself. It's not to say that Ahura Mazda created the lie intentionally, but when he created the truth, because the truth exists, then the lie must also exist. So you've got Spenta Manu versus Anger Manu, representing the truth, versus the Druge, which is the lie. And so this dualism is a necessary aspect of reality that we're living in. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
our solution is identifying this, working together, and understanding that, again, like what Caleb was saying, is that you're going to have, because of the laws of physics, you're going to have suffering. It's an intrinsic part of life. That doesn't mean we have to bring suffering on each other, because we're already going to be experiencing suffering because of the natural order of things, because of the laws of physics, and because of entropy, and so on and so forth. So bonding together is ultimately our best solution for everybody. And because there is a fact that there is a type of reincarnation, it doesn't have to be a spiritual reincarnation like the Buddhists and other Eastern religions teach, but there we are, as Caleb mentioned, to reference something else he said, is we are just stardust, right? So
Mm-hmm.
eventually our bodies, there's exactly 0 organic elements on the periodic table. We are made of inorganic matter. When we die, we are going to go back to inorganic matter, and that inorganic matter is going to eventually, at some point, create life. And it all is this big cycle. And so we are really invested in this eternal and infinite cycle, but this quantum loop gravity cycle, or however people want to define it. You know what I mean?
Well, like that pastor uh, said, though, if you're going to ground
I
yourself in
gotta go.
naturalism, it's going to
I,
fail because ducks rape ducks. That's their nature. So how can you? So are you telling me that rape is good?
No, it comes down. What it
Remember
comes
that?
down to, the solution. Yeah, the solution to this, though, what it comes down to is states of evolution, right?
God,
And what we
that's
refer
just
to
so
as
stupid.
culpability.
Yeah.
Because we have culpability, the ducks don't have culpability. The wind and the rain and the hail and the tornadoes and monsoons don't have culpability. We have a very special part to play right now in this particular aspect of reality that we are in right now, and it entails culpability. And that's the
Right.
difference. And that's where morality comes into play. If you don't have culpability, then morality is a non sequitur.
What were you gonna say, Sophia?
And guys, I gotta run. I got my daughter's going. I wanted to let you guys know that I have to, I have to go because I'm bringing my daughter to a birthday party, and
All
I got to
right.
get out of here. And I
Okay.
just want to let you guys know I had a lot of fun. I really appreciate this, and everybody stay fly, man.
All right.
All right.
Peace.
Love you, Sophia.
Yeah. We won't stay on that much longer,
Love
anyways.
you.
Yep. We got to get ready to roll out soon. But yeah. So you said the debate though is on the 26th. Make sure you send us the links, and I'll put them in the description under here as well. As soon as you send me that, so anybody that goes back and previews can see it.
Yeah, I do want to do that. I want to get as many people to plug that as possible because the gentleman, so it's going to be happening on a channel called 21st Century Minds. That's the
Uh
number
huh.
2021. So 21st Century Minds. And he is a brilliant young man, the gentleman who's hosting this debate. And he actually, his channel isn't huge yet, but I do, if he decides to get serious about making regular content, he has the talent and the ability and the connections because he's engaged with people like Richard Carrier. I was on his channel one time and I actually spoke with Derek from Myth Vision and Jacob from
Mm.
History Valley. Those are two really big names in the internet sphere. So Tristan Gabriel
Mm-hmm.
is connected to people. And if
Yeah.
we can get this link plugged in, then, and I will say right up front that I am not like a skilled debater per se. This is not something that I spent a lot of time, developing a skill set for. And there is a skill to debate. Now, I expect to perform fairly well because I've been coached up by people like Ember. I don't know if you know who she is, or Mark Reed, if you know these people, but they
Mm-hmm.
are
Mm-hmm.
very intelligent people. Mark Reed has had debates against Jim Bob and some other big names, and he's performed
Mm-hmm.
very well. So, Joe from the Kentucky Atheist, he debated
Mm-hmm.
Ken Ham. So these guys, I think it was Kent Ham. Yeah, yeah. No, no, not Kent Ham. Whatever the other guy's name is, the other
Kent
guy who likes
Hovind.
to. Thank you, Hovind. Yeah, he's debated and he's cooked him. So these guys have coached me up a lot, and I do expect to perform fairly well. But it's an extremely important topic, and so I think if we can get as many people interacting with this debate as possible, I
Yeah.
think that the benefit, just like with any debate, it's not about me convincing this piece of trash that he's a bigot and everything else, because that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
his road to walk. But it's for the people who watch this debate that will hopefully will get some people that are somewhat on the fence or that are open to having their minds changed, that will look at this and say, wow, these ideas, this Christian national lead to Christian nationalism, this theocracy, this is very harmful and dangerous. And that's my hope with all this.
Yeah. 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 That sounds like a very interesting debate. And yeah, Mark Reed is excellent, especially on evolution, topics of evolution, atheism, stuff like that. He's very, very good with that. Um, so yeah, it sounds like he's plugged in with the right folks. And if you're getting mentored, that's great, man. Um,
Yeah.
really show out, man. Show up and show out because that's what it is.
Uh,
Present
uh,
the best argument. Go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah,
oh.
I'm looking to drop the hammer, and I do feel bad because I do have friends and family, obviously, like all of us do, and who are Christians, and I do have a lot of people that I interact with in a very civil manner that are Christians, and it's going to be impossible for me to perform well in this debate and also to make sound arguments without dunking all over the Bible. I mean, I'm just going to just be dunking all over the Bible, and
Yeah,
it's just a unfortunate thing that's going to happen. But it's happening on the 26th, which is a Friday coming up here very soon, and
perfect.
I do expect it to be. It's going to get pretty heated. Now, I always try to be polite and civil, and I do have a reputation for being very polite. I've had people on the internet who are Christians tell me that when I debate them, I'm very polite, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to try to maintain that. But unfortunately, I'm going to come, I'm taking the gloves off for this one. And I won't
Yeah.
engage in ad hominem attacks, obviously, but I am going to literally just dunk all over the Bible
Oh,
and the
do it.
religion.
They
Yeah.
can't stand when you go to their book. They don't like. They are terrified from their own book. So go there.
Oh, the two most fearful things for Christians and religious people in general. One is their own book, and the other one is history.
Yeah.
Oh, before we ended the discussion, I just wanted to actually try to answer the question of can consciousness exist without a brain?
Yeah,
And,
go right ahead. What's your thought?
and my thought is that it's to me it's hard. It's I'm with objective ethics on this of like I don't know, but it's like to me it's like there's obviously like if we just look at the most simplistic life form of like a single-celled organism, it's like there's obviously an experience going on, and there can
Hmm.
be the question of is this experience a conscious experience, and that discussion is happening both in philosophical circles and scientific ones, but I would say though that the position I'm more certain on though is like I'm open to the idea of consciousness existing without a brain, but what I would say though is that perhaps a consciousness comparable to a human's though might not be possible without a brain. Like you would have
Yeah.
to be able to self-reflect the way that we do, and just all the different complex emotions that humans can have and experience. Like I would say you probably need something like a brain or comparable
Yeah.
to a brain in order to experience those.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I wouldn't disagree. In fact, you'd be surprised for me to say that I agree with you 100%.
Mhm.
The reason why is because it just really depends on your perspective. Like, what perspective are we speaking from, right? Like, if you were to say like a universal level, let's even take consciousness out of it. Let's talk about matter. So, like, on a universal level, let's somehow take this God's eye view.
Mhm.
Well, there would be nothing but energy. Everything that exists, there would be no, ciphers like the tables here, the computers there. Another way to talk about it is say that atoms and subatomic particles are all sort of arranged in computer-wise ways to sit on particles and subatomic particles that are arranged in a table-wise way, right?
Mhm.
So which way of speaking about it is more correct? I think both are correct. Just depends on where you're coming from. But if we were to take that more fundamental level, you would say that all there is in existence is stuff that exists. And we can talk about all the properties of those existence and point them out. Like we know that we're conscious. We
Mhm.
know that brains exist as tangible matter.
Yeah.
So it all exists as one thing from one perspective, from like a high perspective. So consciousness would be everywhere from that perspective. It would be non-local. That's what quantum mechanics tells us, anyways.
Mhm.
But from another, from a biological perspective, it seems like you can't have consciousness without a human can't have human consciousness without a human brain. They go together. They're correlated too tightly.
Yeah.
And so the correlations matter. And so the way I would kind of sum it up is to say that brains are what consciousness looks like from a disassociated boundary from my own. It's what your consciousness looks like because you need a brain in order to be conscious. But you also need things to be conscious of, like we were talking about the asymmetry and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So it
Yeah.
all comes together from a high perspective. It all is just
Yeah.
one big thing,
And yeah, and tying in complexity into that, it's like the more
Yeah,
complex the system is, the more I'm trying to think of the word, like the more rich of experience the
that's right.
consciousness can have.
Yeah, like there's this theory called integrated information theory, and it says any system, like it says that consciousness is fundamental. It just says consciousness is this thing, this causal structure. But
Mhm.
when it finds a system that's able to be complex enough to have like a rich sort of experience, the consciousness level, the quantity, which is measured in what they call phi, increases. So it's kind of like from that theoretical model, it's like conscious systems are easily embodied by consciousness to be a
Mhm.
certain kind of consciousness. Like a consciousness of a rat would be different than that of an elephant, vice
Yeah.
versa. Just depends on the system.
I think that Caleb really summed it up probably the most practically as it could be. And I
Mm-hmm.
really I agree with what he said 100%, because the issue for me comes down to what people refer to as contingent and non-contingent. So if consciousness exists outside the brain, it is still, our awareness of this consciousness is contingent on the brain. Therefore, essentially, without a brain, consciousness, whether it can exist or not, is irrelevant, because the brain is a contingent property of consciousness. And I think another thing to touch on is that now what we're doing is we're introducing a trifecta here, because the mind is a property of the brain. Is the mind now consciousness, or are we actually saying consciousness is separate from that? So it gets really deep really fast,
Mm-hmm.
and finding truth in there is a real fun exercise. It's a very, very fun thought experiment.
Yeah, like, you could say, like, when you remember stuff, for example, you can say, well, I remember having this experience, but you couldn't have remembered unless you had that experience. So it seems like the experience is more fundamental than the mind's ability to remember it or relive it, or, like you said, we all kind of live in the past anyways. So it seems like the experience happens whether we're aware of it or not, and then it sort of informs the mind, or the mind is able to process it through the brain, or whatever you want to say. But the experience itself seems to be fundamental to consciousness. It seems like that's the underlying. I wouldn't say thing, because you couldn't say it's a thing, but it's a reality that that is how you epistemically know that you exist. You have to have, first of all, an awareness before you can have the thoughts to say I exist, and so on and so forth. And then two, like I think you were talking about contingency. And see, this is the real interesting thing. If we speak in terms of, say, science, we have this thing called quantum non-locality, which is part of quantum field theory. So quantum field theory is the idea that really all of matter, energy, and everything that exists is sort of grounded in this field of probability, possibilities, and it's distributed in a certain way that gives rise to, say, this particle, this thing, that thing, on and on. But it's all non-local. So in a sense, when you're having your localized experience, that's kind of an illusion, because you are necessarily connected to the field, to the quantum field. So at least on that perspective, you could say that consciousness, even matter and energy, is non-contingent. That these things are eternal, and that consciousness is just a part of the energy. It's an aspect of what the energy is.
Well, I really appreciate the chance to interact with you and Sophia and Caleb. I'm so glad you invited me out here, because this has been a very thought-provoking exercise, and I don't know if we've come to any hard, fast solutions about this dilemma, but
Right.
it's just given me so much to think about and meditate on. And I think that what we did successfully do is tie this overarching concept of consciousness to our humanity, and really touch on a lot of things that are important about humanity that are tied to current events that are getting a lot of traction right now. So I feel this conversation has been extremely beneficial, certainly to myself, if I could just say that. I'm hoping that to other people who engaged, and to people who will engage with this video, that they find they could take something from this and maybe apply it to the way that they're treating other people, the way that they're viewing themselves, and maybe look at things kind of critically in that way. And I
Hmm.
appreciate you guys invited me out here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for coming through. And yeah, these things I don't expect will have any hard answers or solutions. They're all sort of like philosophical perspectives and worldviews. And for everybody in the audience, if you find this kind of information, these kind of conversations helpful in any way, please like and subscribe. We have these conversations once a week on Saturday, usually around 12 p.m. Central Time. And we'd love to see you. We're trying to grow out the community, so please like and subscribe. And thanks, Caleb, for joining too, man. You're always bring very insightful things to the conversation.
Well, I was glad to be a part of it. And objective ethics, you also have a brilliant mind. It was
Yes, he does.
I enjoyed speaking with you, and you too, Scott. It was great.
Oh, thank you, man. I learned a lot from you guys, and especially from my new friend, Objective Ethics. Man, I've learned so much today, and I'm just so glad he came on to share this information because I know folks in my community, they are very interested in the different worldviews that we have and different takes on it because we're no man is an island. We can always learn from each other.
Mhm.
That's what it's all about, man.
Yeah. And I'll try to put in some time so I can watch your debate.
Oh yeah, that'll be fun.
Well, you gentlemen, you're very gracious, and I am humbled by the kind words, and I thank you for that. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that in regards to the debate itself, not only am I open to having discussions with people who disagree with me, I encourage people to give me critical feedback on the performance itself because I want to engage more effectively in these arenas. And so I'm definitely going to fall short. I already know it, and I'm more than willing to listen to people who can, offer criticisms and say you should have done this, or you missed out this opportunity, or you missed out on this logical fallacy, whatever it might be. So I encourage you to listen with a critical ear. Don't just come to just vote for me or whatever the process is. Come to be critical and come to think critically and to engage critically and to offer any insight that you might have. I really appreciate the feedback.
Absolutely, man. And make sure you send me that link because I wanna blow it up.
Yeah, that'll happen. As soon as I get it, I'll make sure and get it out to you. And what I might do is you post it in the description of this video. I may come back and put it in the comment section. And anybody,
Yep.
Caleb, if you or anybody else wants to reach out to me, you can give me your email address. I think you can post stuff on my channel. I don't do stuff with my channel. I only created it when I was selling boats. So I took all the video. Once I sold the business and sold the patents, I took all the videos except for one off my channel. But I believe people can leave comments on there, or you can leave a comment here and tag me on this channel, however you want to do it. And that goes for anybody who's listening. If you want to reach out to me, and again, same thing, if you don't like some of the things I said today, or you find something I said be objectionable, please reach out to me and give me your best argument. I'd love to hear it.
We're going to cancel you, all right?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, better
You're
men than you have
fired.
tried it, Caleb. Better men than you have tried it, brother. I'm still here.
Congratulations. Congratulations, you're fired. All right, guys. Thank you so much, man. Y'all have a great rest of your weekend.
You too.
All right, peace.